the most insane, dangerous places you've never heard of. You and your best friend have decided to go to Ethiopia to explore the landscape and to do some hiking. You find yourself camping and living off the land, sleeping in tents, stargazing, and fortunately you did pack food because catching decent food in the middle of a Ethiopian desert isn't quite ideal. As the sun rises one morning, you decide to go a place you haven't quite explored yet. A direction that from a distance doesn't look anything special, but for some reason it's calling your name. You set off walking through the rather flat and barren landscape, with mountains off in the distance, but nothing particularly special, until you notice something strange in the distance. You find yourself approaching small pools of water, but these pools of water don't quite look right. You see boulders and rocks that are orange and yellow and white. You see water that is varying colors of green, and you feel like you almost walked into an alien planet. As you approach some of these pools of water, you realize they're not just sedentary pools of water, they're volcanic hot springs, and they're steaming. At this point, you're standing directly beside one of these large green puddles surrounded by orange and yellow rocks, and your friend starts to cough almost uncontrollably. They're telling you that their throat is burning and they run away because they can't catch their breath and they feel like they're literally inhaling bleach. Whatever was affecting them wasn't affecting you, and you decide that you want to investigate a bit further. This green, warm water is essentially at this point begging for you to touch it, and you dip your hand in this water. It's warm to the touch and only slightly warmer than a hot tub, but it has a strange sensation that feels a little bit more than just typical hot water. You notice your hand went from a warm sensation to almost numb, and at that point you lift your hand out of the water to realize that the hand that you once had is no longer there, and you are simply left with exposed bone. This water is not only boiling, but extremely acidic. More acidic than battery acid, and 10 times stronger than the acid we all carry in our stomachs. Understandably terrified, you sprint away from this demonic puddle of water and catch up with your friend who's only now catching your breath. You two are both too freaked out to even speak and decide to sprint back to your base camp only a few kilometers away. It's only on your way back to base camp when you start to feel the effects of the extreme dehydration you and your friend are suffering. You don't have any moisture to sweat, your muscles are beginning to cramp uncontrollably, and all you and your friend can do is simply sit and hope that something, anything, could potentially come to save you. But in the middle of a barren wasteland in Ethiopia, help isn't coming, and you and your friend just became victims of the Danakil Depression. The Danakil Depression is such an interesting and honestly unique place, and although I may have embellished a few details in the story, everything I did say was true. The Danakil Depression is a very unique and odd geographical phenomenon located, like I said, in Ethiopia. It's called the Danakil Depression not because it's upset, but because it is literally depressed into the ground, located over 400 feet below sea level. And the reason why this place even exists is because it's in the center of 3 tectonic plates that are slowly shifting apart, meaning that the depression is slowly sinking deeper and deeper into the ground. Before we even get into the weird colored rocks and weird toxic water that exists within the Danakil Depression, it's important to note one thing. The Danakil Depression is the hottest place on Earth year-round. So although technically Death Valley in California has the highest recorded temperature, keyword recorded, the Danakil Depression has the highest average temperature year-round, that being 34 degrees Celsius as an average, which is 9 degrees hotter than the average temperature of Death Valley, and even a few degrees hotter than the second hottest place on Earth year-round. That fact alone would make it worthy of being on this list, because those kinds of heats are deadly. But for the Danakil Depression, that's one of its more tame attributes. So we know why it's called a depression, and we know why it's slowly sinking, and now we know that it's extremely hot, but what's going on with these weird moon rocks? Well, there's actually a few reasons for that. What little water is available mixes with the iron, copper, and sulfur from the surrounding volcanoes. Oh yeah, did I mention this place literally has volcanoes too? That high concentration of minerals in the low concentration of water with the very unique conditions that the volcanic region provides creates these very strange and unique looking structures. The water is in fact acidic, although it likely wouldn't melt your hand to the bone in a matter of seconds, but it is in parts more acidic than battery acid and, like I mentioned, 10 times more acidic than the acid in your stomach. Not all of the water is this acidic, although none of it's marked, and personally, that's not a gamble I want to take, so I wouldn't be dipping my hand in. Oh, and the throat burning? Yeah, that's because of the high concentration of chlorine that also exists in some of these pools. Once again, unmarked, so it's kind of a gamble on which pools are gonna burn your throat and melt your skin. But if you get the right pool, you'd be sitting in a nice natural jacuzzi, but there's other places you could do that, likely less risky as well. I wanted to add the Danakil Depression to this list just because it's so unique looking and honestly has some very unique attributes. It almost reminds me of a combination between Lake Natron and Death Valley, because it consists of obviously an extremely hot location that also has very deadly bodies of water. This is something that I haven't heard of until doing research for this video, so I knew it was a great way to start off the video. But this is only the first entry on this list, and you and your friend are only beginning your globe-trotting journey around the world. So let's get to this next dangerous location you probably should have never gone to. You're getting off the plane at your next location, and at this point, you and your friend are still confused on how you made it out of the Danakil Depression alive. Regardless, you get right to your expedition. Walking off the remote runway, you walk directly into the Amazon rainforest. Part of the Amazon rainforest that is specifically in Peru. You and your friend realized that you didn't necessarily enjoy the barren landscape of an African desert, so you figured getting some lush forests with plenty of moisture would be a nice change of pace. You and your friend are swinging machetes, cutting down brush, and making your own little trail, and seeing a lot of really unique and cool things that live in the rainforest. When all of a sudden, you see a weird fog roll in. This isn't necessarily uncommon for the rainforest, as fog is common in particular parts, but you're not at a particularly high elevation, but it doesn't strike you as too peculiar. You keep hacking and slashing, and you notice that you're getting closer and closer to a river, something you've been looking for at this point as you've exhausted all of your water. You and your friend are definitely more timid about random water sources at this point, but this water is normal. It's not green, it's not surrounded by volcanic sulfur rocks, nobody's breathing in chlorine gas, and everything seems to be fine. Besides the fog that's gotten thicker and thicker, and seemingly warmer. But you brush off that warm fog as simply a product of hiking through the rainforest, and a mixture of the humidity plus your body heat would make any fog feel warm. Your friend, less careful than you, decides that it's the perfect time for a swim, and although he can't see the water, he knows where it is. So he takes off his backpack and jumps directly in. And as soon as his body touches the water, you hear the most blood-curdling scream you could ever imagine. Obviously, your friend must have landed on a rock or been bitten by an animal, so you instantly rush in after him to drag him out. And as soon as you jump in, you understand why your friend was screaming so horrifically. The river you just run into was boiling hot, cooking you and your friend alive. You two have just become the most recent victim of the boiling river in Peru. Once again, we find ourselves in an almost fairy tale location. As I mentioned in the story, the boiling river is a real place, and it's a rather modest river that flows through the Amazon rainforest in Peru. The fog that you and your buddy saw was steam, and that's because this water is hot, and I mean scalding hot. It reaches temperatures of up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, or 93 degrees Celsius, which is, yeah, hot. This heat alone makes it one of the most dangerous rivers on Earth, especially because it's so unassuming looking, unless you know what you're looking for. It may be unsurprising to you that this river, like the first, is being heated to such a high temperature by geothermal activity happening beneath the Earth's surface. Fortunately, this river isn't a big risk for tourists, as the location of this river is rather remote and challenging to even get to. And although you and your friend perhaps are experienced bushwhackers, many people aren't. And the majority of the death toll caused by this river are small animals who don't know any better. And on top of the challenging and remote nature of this location and the sheer presence of a boiling river, the last unsurprising aspect that makes this river so dangerous is, well, its inhabitants. Surrounding the river, like many parts of the rainforest, is venomous snakes, venomous spiders, and even leaves that could potentially cut your skin, like little paper cuts. Crazy. Seriously though, yeah, I mean, this one's pretty straightforward, but it's still crazy, and I've never heard of this before, so I knew I had to add it on this list of dangerous locations. This may seem simple, but you have to keep in mind, who in the right mind would just assume that a river is boiling? I would say it's relatively reasonable to assume water is cool, or maybe even room temperature at its warmest. But if we've learned anything from these first two stories, it's that if you're in some crazy, isolated, and unique locations, make sure you check the water. Maybe with a stick, or maybe just ignore it altogether. I guess one thing about this river that's cool is that if you get lost in the Amazon rainforest somehow and you happen to find this river and don't become a victim to it, this would be the perfect way to make rainforest soup. Literally, just go catch bugs, sticks, rocks, maybe not rocks, actually. Anything that doesn't look poisonous, put it in the water, let it boil, and there you go. You got rainforest stew. So bring it down a little bit on the danger meter because it could save your life if you live off stew. But okay, let's get to the next location. You and your friend once again find yourself in a familiar place, sitting beside each other on an airplane. Although this time you're more bandaged up and a bit more damaged than you were before. You and your friend are discussing how you must have a guardian angel because even though you are ending up in these deadly locations, you're still somehow just barely escaping. mysteriously. And you're also discussing how you're upset that you never got to make rainforest soup, at least with ingredients that are not your body. It was at this moment when you land and get to your next destination, a destination that is a huge change of pace from the ones you visited so far. You walk off the plane and onto the frozen lake, which is the only runway in and out of this city, and you take a deep breath, only to have your nostrils almost instantly frozen. You were bundled up as much as you could be, but even with the warmest clothes you could find, there's not much you can do against the frigid temperatures of where you're currently at. You have just landed in Oymyakon, an extremely remote part of Russia, which is not only extremely isolated, but it's also the coldest inhabited place on Earth. Plot twist, eh? You and your friend didn't die this time. Wow. Call that character development. Seriously though, Oymyakon is an interesting place, and I don't think it's necessarily hard to understand the dangers of severe cold. And by severe cold, like -40 degrees is pretty average during the winter, and the lowest recorded temperature ever was -98.9 degrees Fahrenheit, or -67.7 degrees Celsius. This place is beyond frigid. And sure, we could discuss all of the ways that this extreme cold could cause frostbite and hypothermia and other cold-related illnesses and death. But instead of talking about how you would die in this place, I want to talk about how you live in this place. Because living in a place this cold comes with some very unique challenges. Challenges that you probably wouldn't have thought of, unless you're super big brain. And in that case, good for you. The geographic location of the city also not only causes cold temperatures, but causes very weird day-night cycles. Like a lot of places in the Arctic Circle, this isn't too uncommon, so I won't stay on it for too long, but there is extremely dark winters where there is literally just a sunset for weeks on end, which is by itself quite eerie, but that's like a minor detail. The way that this temperature affects everyday life for the people that live here is just rather unusual, and personally unideal. You honestly don't even really live here, you just survive here. One of the first extreme inconveniences is the fact that these houses do not have plumbing. And one of the most important aspects of plumbing is your toilet. That's a creature comfort that you give up to live in one of the coldest places on Earth. What you have instead is a nice, shiny outhouse outside. Basically a wooden box around a hole in the ground. But Shrek had one, so that's kind of cool. And while they do have water that runs through their house, it is heated up through cold generators and distributed through the city via a truck that is literally moving boiling water so that it doesn't freeze in the pipe and burst them, which is likely a common occurrence. And even with this minimal running water, it's still extremely inconvenient. But that still is only the tip of the iceberg. See what I did there? Because this place is so cold, parts of regular cars just stop working. The oil gets extremely viscous, which prevent the engine from even starting, which is why locals either have to keep their car running consistently to maintain a proper engine temperature, or if they do decide to turn off their car, they have to essentially light a fire under their engine for a good 10-15 minutes to allow the oil to heat up to become less viscous to allow the engine to hopefully start. So you can really take your pick there, but for most people it's more convenient to simply just leave the car idling. Another pretty major inconvenience. So yeah, so far we got no toilet, permanently idling vehicles, and also permafrost, which means for us, no vegetation, making vegetables extremely rare, and your diet almost fully meat, and maybe the occasional bread if you're lucky. And if you so happen to become a victim of the location in which you live, even your burial becomes a rather extensive process, as permafrost makes not only farming, but also burying bodies rather difficult. And funerals here often begin with a fire simply to heat up the ground. And even then, it's not easy digging into this deep permafrost. But yeah, those are just a few creature comforts you don't get. And also, say goodbye to your smartphone, because yeah, you know how it's like kind of cold and your iPhone just randomly dies? Here, if you take any electronic outside, they're cooked. So yeah, you and your friend might have not died going to Oymyakon, but you definitely do not want to live there. So you two already begin packing your bags. Okay, quick intermission and I guess honorable mention. Before we get to this next entry on the list, I just want to mention a general concept, not even a general location: active war zones. Holy. When I was researching for this video, I was shocked by all of the active war zones that there is across the world. Like sure, you hear about stuff on the news, but there's literally so many ongoing geopolitical disputes that just make entire areas completely dangerous to even just be near due to the high tensions. So although this is likely obvious and not worthy of its own point, I did want to make it a quick honorable mention. Yeah, if you're going somewhere, especially somewhere you're not familiar with, check for active war zones, because believe it or not, they can add some complexity to your trip that you likely aren't looking to deal with. Okay, let's keep going. Back on the plane, you and your friends realize that you've experienced a bit of a Goldilocks situation. You've experienced too hot. Now you've experienced too cold. And the next place you're going definitely is going to be just right. Reluctantly, you decide to go back to Africa, but not Ethiopia. You decide to go to the Congo. It's in a different part of Africa, so it's got to be different. You touch down in a city known as Goma, and it's a relatively beautiful place. Once again, you want to continue your hobby of hiking, and you see a beautiful mountain that is just calling your name. The mountain is known as Mount Nyiragongo, but little do you and your friend know, it's also known as the Nyiragongo volcano. Your hike up is relatively peaceful, although you don't see too many locals, but you do see a few scientists wearing some funny-looking silver suits. And as you approach the summit of the mountain, you prepare to look over the amazing landscape that you've been spending the last few days in. But as you get closer and closer to the top of the mountain, you realize there is no top of this mountain. There is only a ledge. And if you look inside the ledge, you will find the largest lava lake of its kind in the world. At this point, you and your friend have learned to not jump into random bodies of water. And although this isn't a body of water, to your friend, it still looked a little tempting. You and your friend have learned your lessons around volcanoes and just decided if they're dangerous underground, they're definitely dangerous above ground. So you guys make your way back down, spend some time in the village, and the night before you flight, you reflect on how much fun you've had in the Congo. Until in the middle of the night, during your sleep, you are woken up by people screaming, yelling, and most importantly, running. This mountain and volcano isn't dangerous simply because of the presence of this large lava lake. It's dangerous because this volcano is one of the most active volcanoes in the world. And it doesn't take a scientist to understand that volcanic eruptions are extremely dangerous. Fortunately, you, your friend, and all of the locals make it out of the city alive. But unfortunately, the lava has essentially destroyed everything that was there. And that was the reality for many people in 2002 during one of the last eruptions, which left thousands of people homeless, and unfortunately took some victims with it. This entry is definitely one of the more known entries on this list, but I wanted to add it because volcanoes are just such interesting phenomenon, and it seemed on theme for this video. In reality, many people don't have access to just simply climb to the top of this mountain, as access is tightly regulated due to the obvious risks involved, and is typically only left for scientists. But like I mentioned, beyond just the lava lake on the top of this mountain, the entire area is prone to seismic activity, meaning that if even the volcano doesn't erupt, there's a very good chance that a dangerous earthquake could cause some serious damage to you or the place that you live. This mountain and general geographic location is beautiful and interesting, at the very least scientifically. But due to the unpredictable and obviously dangerous force of nature, the city of Goma and surrounding areas are definitely a place that I would consider to be extremely dangerous. So yeah, this one's not necessarily unheard of, and it's not even the most dangerous, but I'm hoping the cool factor can kind of make up for that. One quick note I want to make is if you're an OG Trust Me Bro fan, then you probably thought I have covered this topic before, and you're not fully wrong. About 9 months ago, I made a much worse video about how you would die in dangerous locations. And in that video, I discussed pretty well-known locations and I went into detail about how they would kill you. I wanted to make this video because I think the topic is just so interesting, and honestly, my videos are a lot better now than they were 9 months ago. So although that video was fine, this video is a lot better. And if you want a good laugh, check in the description. I'll link that video that we posted 9 months ago. So before we get into our last location, I want to say 2 quick things. 1, if you've already written a comment saying, I know about these, I live here, please understand this. I'm just a simple stick boy, and a lot of these are news to me. And some of them were just too cool to not put on this list. So if you've heard of any of these, simply appreciate the fact that you're just bigger brained. And if you know some facts about these locations, drop them in the comments. And secondly, I just want to say if you guys enjoy videos about crazy, scary, illegal, and creepy locations, please let me know in the comments below. I try to read all of the comments and I take your suggestions very seriously. Now, let's get into our final location. And I guess while we're on the topic, you and your friend are now just fed up. You both look like that guy from SpongeBob with the glass bones and the paper skin. And you realize that you've had it with this overseas travel. You're going back to the States and you're playing Minecraft. That's gonna be your form of exploration. But after some time healing and playing Minecraft, you get that wanderlust once again. And you and your friend decide to plan one more trip. Although this trip is domestic, and you're going somewhere that has to be safe. You drive up to Washington State, specifically southeastern Washington State. And the objective of this travel is not to do any outdoor hiking or to do anything crazy with nature. You've learned your lesson. What you want to do is some urban exploring. And you found this really cool, old, abandoned factory-looking place on the Columbia River. And you and your friend approach this location but have to park far away because it is still, for some reason, pretty heavily secured. But you guys are slick. You hike at night into this abandoned facility. This place looks cool. You're walking around, checking stuff out, looking at rusty things and broken things, when all of a sudden, you hear your friend say that he doesn't feel so good. You look up at him and he looks up at you, and you're faced with a ghoul from the Fallout games. You think you're tripping because there's no way your friend could look like this, when all of a sudden your friend tells you that you look like a disgusting creature. And it's at that point when you realize that both you and your friend have been exposed to massive amounts of nuclear waste. And that you weren't in just some regular factory. You were in the Hanford site, a decommissioned nuclear production complex that was established as part of the Manhattan Project during World War II. Okay, I got a little goofy with the story there, but it is true. This is an extremely dangerous place that not many people are familiar with. At least I wasn't. If you're anywhere in Washington State, this is likely one of the most known just because it's native in the US, and it does have relatively major historical context, so consider this one not even unknown. But this one is really cool. And, like you guessed, insanely dangerous. This place had the world's first full-scale plutonium production reactor, and made the plutonium for the Fat Man, which is the bomb that was used on Nagasaki during World War II. So So this place has some baggage. But once the US government thought that they had enough plutonium, they started shutting down the facility and actually closed it down entirely in 1971, which isn't too long ago, at least when it involves radioactive waste. It likely may serve as no surprise that early protocols for disposing of such dangerous chemicals and byproducts were completely inadequate, and now we're seeing the consequence of it. And Hanford site is one of the largest environmental cleanup projects in the entire world. Obviously, there's a few more known ones across the world like Chernobyl and Hiroshima, but domestically in the States, this is definitely one of the biggest cleanup projects. As of last year, they are still cleaning it up, and there's over 10,000 people that work to clean up this site. I'm assuming they have proper protective gear, but still, working in a radioactive site cannot be fun. Or safe. I meant to say safe. Fun or safe. You and your friend survived so many near-death experiences just to turn into ghouls, which I guess is now fine because now you guys can live forever and experience all the places that would have killed you before. What a happy ending. Terrifying mental disorders you've never heard of. Cotard syndrome. During the late 1880s, French neurologist Jules Cotard had a very peculiar experience with one of his patients. Her name was Mademoiselle X, and she came to the neurologist claiming that she didn't need to eat anymore. She said this because she believed that she was dead. For some reason, this patient was fully convinced that she had no stomach, no chest, no blood, and no brain. And she knew for a fact that she simply wasn't alive and was not able to die. She told Cotard that she must have been condemned to eternal damnation, and for that reason she cannot possibly die a natural death. As if she could have, she would have died already, as her organs were rotting and she didn't have any blood. And because this patient believed that she had no internal organs, she simply stopped eating as there was no need to, and unsurprisingly, she later died of starvation. This interaction that Jules Cotard had experienced with this patient definitely left an imprint on him and forced him to document everything that this patient was saying and every symptom that they were having. Through this study, he coined the term Cotard syndrome and described the condition as the delusion of negation, stating that it was a psychiatric syndrome that varied in severity. He claimed that mild cases were characterized by despair and self-loathing, while severe cases were characterized by intense delusions of negation and chronic psychiatric depression. Now, although this sounds like an odd one-off story that happened almost 200 years ago, that's not at all the case, and this syndrome still exists today. And while it is extremely rare, there are still people suffering from this syndrome around the world. Cotard syndrome is also known as the walking corpse syndrome. The main symptom of having Cotard syndrome is having a strong belief that you are dead. Many people with this condition simply believe that their internal organs are rotting, or that those organs are missing altogether and they are just existing but not alive. A statistical analysis of people suffering from this study showed that 55% of patients with Cotard syndrome believed that they were immortal due to this condition, while the other 45% denied their own existence, claiming that they did not exist, which is definitely a hard sell when you're the one explaining you don't exist. Cotard syndrome is relatively simple to understand, but I'm sure for its patients it's an extremely terrifying experience. Just imagine being fully convinced that you're either missing organs or having organs that are rotting away, or just simply believing that you are somehow dead. It's almost mind-bending trying to even comprehend the mindset in the first place, so I couldn't even imagine how confusing it is to be experiencing that as a reality. Most of the people experiencing these delusions typically end up neglecting their personal care, refusing to eat, clean themselves, sleep, use the washroom, and also may experience self-harming behaviors, all because that they believe there is no reason to maintain a body that they literally consider to be lifeless. To this day, very little is known about this syndrome, but it is still associated with severe depression, schizophrenia, and other neurological issues such as brain lesions. Cotard syndrome is a very peculiar mental condition, but for this list, it's only the tip of the iceberg, and we're just getting into some of the most terrifying and rare mental conditions. Koro. I want you to be honest. Have you ever looked down and thought, dang, my little bro must be shrinking. It was never this small. Well, in that case, you might be suffering from Koro. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin with it. It's also known as genital retraction syndrome or shrinking penis disease, both of which definitely give an odd foundation, and both of which are actually not even fully accurate. And while Koro is a syndrome that does occur worldwide, it is considered a cultural bound delusion, essentially meaning that the symptoms of this delusion are only recognized in specific societies and cultures. Patients suffering with Koro experience overwhelming and intense beliefs that their sexual organs are retracting, and while this literally isn't happening, these people suffering from this disease will go to extreme lengths to prevent this shrinkage shrinkage from happening. Most people suffering from this condition typically begin by reporting anxiety attacks due to their perceived lack of genitalia. And this perceived shrinkage will be a huge cause of stress for the individual suffering from Koro. And if you're a woman, don't think you're safe from Koro, because there are women who experience Koro, but obviously they aren't experiencing their penis shrinking. They believe that their nipples are retracting and that their breasts are also retracting into their bodies, slowly shrinking. There are cases in which patients experiencing Koro symptoms will have these symptoms for years, and at that point it will be considered chronic. And to doctors, that is an indication of a potential comorbidity with body dysmorphic disorder, also known as BDD. Interestingly, a lot of people experiencing Koro also experience an intense anxiety or fear of impending death, essentially meaning that these people believe that their genitals will shrink so small that they are literally going to die. And this specific belief has a strong cultural link to traditional Chinese beliefs. This sounds kind of silly and obviously odd, but the delusions that these patients are experiencing are nothing funny and truly terrifying. This delusion can cause extreme anxiety, panic, compulsive behaviors, and even habits such as genital stretching to prevent this perceived shrinkage or retraction. The cause for this delusion isn't fully clear, but it is believed to be primarily fueled by cultural beliefs and stress. Now, like I mentioned, if you are experiencing Koro, you aren't actually experiencing any sort of shrinkage of any of your body parts. But what's interesting is that there is a bit of a devious feedback loop that you are getting. Typically, when people are experiencing a Koro attack, they will experience vasoconstriction, which will actually cause their genitals to temporarily shrink a little bit. This actually affirms their delusion and causes a very vicious cycle until the delusion is so strong that it is simply a core belief. And while this vasoconstriction is only temporary, when you are believing such a odd delusion, you are not necessarily thinking logically about this. And even when presented with the fact, it is still hard to come to the conclusion that you are not shrinking. Depending on what culture you're a part of when you are experiencing this Koro, the treatments may differ. In traditional Chinese medicine, typically the remedy that is recommended is a herbal tincture that is applied to your genitals. While in some African cultures, people experiencing Koro will be prescribed a weight to attach to their genitals to help stretch it, to of course maintain its size. Neither of these remedies sound particularly pleasant, and this entire affliction, while silly seeming, is definitely rare. It is a bit unfortunate that your body is almost unwillingly feeding into your delusion by shrinking your junk during these times of panic, unintentionally feeding your delusion more and more. However, typically instances of Koro are not lifelong. Although we may be able to get a chuckle out of it, it's definitely something I would never want to experience. So yeah, Koro literally has men believing that their penis is shrinking and it's gonna get so small that they are literally going to die. And it's still only the second entry on this list. Let's keep going. Body integrity identity disorder. Body integrity identity disorder, also known as BIID, is a condition that I felt made a lot of sense to put here because it kind of relates to the last one, although it's not fully the same. People who are experiencing Koro disorder believe that one of their appendages is shrinking and they are trying to maintain it, whereas people with BIID experience essentially a disassociation from one of their limbs. What this means is that people experiencing this condition essentially don't want either part or one or multiple of their limbs because to them it just doesn't feel like it's theirs. To try to understand how these people are feeling, people with BIID have described it as imagining that you are growing a new limb. That would feel unnatural and you obviously wouldn't want that there. That's how people with BIID feel about their natural born limbs. And people experiencing this condition typically go to extreme lengths to essentially feel normal, typically by seeking amputation for the perfectly healthy limb. Some patients with severe cases of this disorder even wish and desire to become paraplegic. This condition is extremely rare and also uncommonly studied, meaning that there is not much known about it, besides the fact that it blurs the lines between psychiatry and neurology. And for most people suffering from BIID, treatment specifically focuses on understanding the underlying cause for this deep desire. And like I mentioned, for some, does result in amputation. Imagine how you would feel if you felt like there was a part of your body that simply was alien to you, and with nobody to relate to or to be able to give you any sort of answers, it must be a lonely and heartbreaking experience. One thing that came to mind when researching this specific disorder was that one episode of Dr. Phil when that lady poured, I believe it was like drain cleaner in her eyes to make herself permanently blind because she just wanted to be blind. I'm not sure if she was suffering specifically from BIID, but it definitely seems like she was suffering similar symptoms and obviously didn't feel like she was supposed to have the ability to see. But speaking of these limbs feeling alien, let's discuss the next mental disorder. Alien hand syndrome. Alien hand syndrome varies pretty drastically from BIID in one major way. People experiencing alien hand syndrome don't feel like their hand isn't supposed to be part of their body. Their hand simply doesn't act in accordance to their will, almost as if their hand was a sentient being or acting on its own will, or potentially an alien limb to your body. Patients experiencing alien hand syndrome typically experience symptoms in their left hand, and what this hand does typically varies depending on the severity of the situation. In 1908, when alien hand syndrome was first discovered, a 57-year-old woman was actually attacked by her alien hand, with this hand consistently smacking and trying to choke the woman, and she had to fight for her life to prevent her rogue limb from killing her. And while this example is extreme and obviously terrifying, it's not the norm, although it isn't uncommon for this rogue limb to do things that you likely wouldn't want them to. Like undressing yourself in public, or simply spilling food or drink, or simply dropping things for no apparent reason. Interestingly, while the first case was reported in 1908, the number of cases actually increased in the 1940s onward when a specific surgery for epilepsy began to become more popular. The specific epilepsy surgery that was correlated with alien hand syndrome was a surgery that essentially disconnected both sides of the brain, cutting the corpus callosum down the center of the brain. The corpus callosum is essentially a bridge of nerves that connects the left brain to the right brain, and disconnecting them, although effective for epilepsy, had consequences. And while that specific epilepsy treatment isn't the only cause for alien hand syndrome, it was definitely one of the most prominent initially. However, with more recent research, it has been discovered that people with medial frontal cortex or parietal lobe damage can also suffer from an alien hand. Although, depending on the area of your brain that was damaged, you will get a different type of alien hand syndrome, which is interesting and also pretty scary. Which I suppose makes sense, but definitely doesn't make it any less scary. People who had their medial frontal cortex damaged typically experience their alien hand being mischievous, with the most common symptoms being impulsive groping and the reluctance to let go of anything. With damage to your corpus callosum, typically you experience your hands literally fighting each other, which I can only imagine is a very unpleasant and scary experience. Now, somewhat differently, people with damage to their parietal lobe experience this condition a bit differently, as they not only don't have control over this arm and have it kind of do whatever it wants, they also feel estranged from this limb. Similar, but not to the same extent that people with BIID experience. But just imagine that. Not only do you feel like this limb that is on your natural body doesn't belong to you, but also not even being able to control it. It simply is there, part of you, but it kind of has a mind of its own. That is undeniably terrifying. Currently, the direct cause for why this happens in the brain is unknown, and unfortunately, there isn't a cure either. One of the most popular treatments is pretty simple and basically just involves making your alien hand hold on to an object consistently to give it something to do, essentially. I think being born with this condition, you could likely learn to adapt to it relatively quickly and it could be part of normal life. But I think one of the most terrifying parts about this disease is that it's typically developed later in life, meaning that you can live a totally normal life having control of both of your arms. And by getting brain damage in one way or another, not only can you lose control of one of your limbs, but you can literally lose control of one of your limbs. Like, this limb isn't just paralyzed. It is doing things without your consent. It has a mind of its own. And depending on the severity of what this hand is doing, you may have a violent appendage attached to your body with its sights aimed at you. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Alice in Wonderland syndrome is a neurological disorder that distorts your perception. Typically, this distortion is experienced visually, and these visual distortions are perceived by objects either appearing larger than they are, or smaller than they are, or closer than they are, or potentially even farther than they are. And as you may be able to assume, this is extremely debilitating. These are only a few of the over 60 symptoms associated with Alice in Wonderland syndrome. The Alice in Wonderland books and movies are interesting and fun and whimsical, but when that sort of psychedelic experience is your consistent reality, it becomes a lot less appealing. And for patients suffering with this condition, they can experience not only visual, but also auditory, touch, and time perception issues. It's important to note that these aren't necessarily hallucinations. They're simply a misinterpretation of real things that are happening for a reason that is not fully understood. All that is known about Alice in Wonderland syndrome is that it's currently associated with migraines, head trauma, and EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. In most cases, patients don't experience symptoms consistently, but rather in series of attacks where suddenly almost everything in their reality changes. Just imagine you're sitting on the couch watching TV when all of a sudden the TV that you're looking at becomes 5 times bigger and the room that you're in becomes 10 times smaller, and all of a sudden all you hear is ringing and people talking, and it feels like time's moving really slow and then really fast, and everything's consistently changing, and you have almost no ground, no basis of reality, and you can't trust what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, or touching, and all you can simply do is wait it out. But this wait itself can seem endless with the perception of time being so distorted. However, as disorienting and terrifying as this experience may sound, this disease is pretty understudied and currently isn't considered a neurological disorder or a psychiatric illness, and is kind of just in this medical gray area. And currently there isn't even a known number of how many people are experiencing this mental condition to begin with. A reason for why it's low priority to be researched is because it's not considered to be dangerous, which I suppose is a nice benefit. However, 15% of people that do experience this condition have their attack almost instantly followed up with a migraine, which definitely adds insult to injury. And in that case, there is at least pain associated with this disorienting experience. This condition has been seen in both adults and children, but is most commonly seen in children. And while its cause is unknown, during studies of people who have been actively having these attacks, there is abnormal amounts of electrical activity taking place inside the patient's brain, resulting in an abnormal amount of blood flow to certain parts of the brain that process visual perception and texture. Regardless, even with the lack of classification and little known information about this disease, to me, the experience of Alice in Wonderland syndrome does sound terrifying and extremely unfortunate for those who suffer essentially in silence with almost no answers. It almost sounds like a random bad trip that you don't consent to and can happen at almost any time. Something I wouldn't wish on anybody. But we do still have one more entry to discuss. And quickly, before we get to this final entry on the list, I did want to mention, there was at least another 10 or 15 entries that I researched and wanted to put in this video that I simply had to cut for time, because we post videos every Friday. So with that, if you guys liked this video about rare and terrifying mental disorders, please let me know if you guys would like a part 2. I've got plenty more to talk about, and I'd also love to hear if you guys have any recommendations in comments below. That being said, let's get to the final entry on this list. Capgras delusion. There's no doubt that every entry on this list in one way or another has been upsetting, disheartening, terrifying, and of course, obscure. But I saved this entry for last because I believe it to be one of likely the most upsetting and depressing entries on this list. But the belief that patients suffering from this delusion believe is extremely disheartening. Those suffering from Capgras delusion believe that someone close to them, typically a loved one, has been replaced by an identical imposter. And in some cases, they even believe that this imposter is going to do them harm. Unsurprisingly, Capgras delusions are typically associated with people experiencing paranoid schizophrenia, but these delusions are also present in people with dementia, brain tumors, and brain injuries. How this works is when you see another human's face, your eyes send a signal to the occipital cortex in your brain, and from there, that signal is sent to the fusiform part of the brain. This part of the brain is specifically responsible for facial recognition, which allows you to not only recognize people, but also tell people apart. The fusiform part of the brain then sends a signal to the amygdala, and based on the signal that the amygdala gets, it will release specific chemicals depending on how you perceive this person. These chemicals are essentially the precursor to emotions and help your brain understand how you love and how you care about someone, and who you love and who you care about. Now, for people with Capgras delusion, their brain varies because the fusiform part of their brain is not sending a strong enough signal to the amygdala, essentially meaning you can recognize somebody's face, but you're not getting the chemical reaction allowing you to essentially feel the emotions you're supposed to feel when seeing and thinking about that person. That lack of chemical release makes this person seem foreign or alien, or like something is missing, which is where the delusion comes into play, that this person must not be the real person that I know and love. This must be an imposter. This must be a clone. This must be a fake. And that is essentially how we understand how this delusion comes to be. And while we may understand how it happens, it doesn't make it any less terrifying or upsetting. If any of you watching this have experienced a family member with Alzheimer's, then you kind of know what I'm talking about. How upsetting and how scary it is to see somebody that you've known all of your life simply not remember you anymore, or to even not like you anymore. Growing up, one of my grandmothers actually had Alzheimer's, and during the later stages of it, she not only forgot forgot who my sister was, who was living with her at the time, she also began to resent my sister for seemingly no reason. I can't imagine how that would feel to have not only your grandmother forget you, but begin to hate you and openly cuss you out and disrespect you. Of course, you have to understand that that's not them, that that's the disease, but it still hurts, and it's disheartening to see the deterioration of a loved one. Obviously, Alzheimer's and schizophrenia as well are terrifying and upsetting diseases, but this video is specifically focused on unheard of and obscure diseases, which is why I didn't outright mention them. Focusing back on Capgras delusion, not only do people suffering from this believe that someone that they love or know may be replaced by some sort of clone, but depending on the severity of their condition, what they do about this belief could range drastically. For example, the person experiencing this delusion may refuse to talk to that person altogether, as they do not believe that that's actually their loved one. In other cases, the person experiencing these delusions may actually physically assault or attack these people, as they believe that they have done something negative with their loved one and replaced them, and they want to find answers. And in most cases, people refuse to believe any evidence to prove that they are not an imposter. And some people even become obsessed with exposing this imposter, going to almost any lengths to expose the true reality, which is obviously just a delusion. It's for this reason that I wanted to save this condition for the end of the list, because I believe on this list it's definitely the most terrifying and upsetting. And as of right now, there is little known, no cure, and not even treatment available for this delusion. Mental health is no joke, and in this video we discussed some truly terrifying and obscure mental health conditions. And I hope that more research will be conducted to help treat people with these conditions. The craziest battles in human history. No, not epic rap battles of history, the craziest battles of history. In this video, I'm going to discuss battles that were crazy and undoubtedly had an impact on history. Let's get started. The year is 1204 AD. You are an ambitious leader with the sole goal of unifying all of Mongolia under a single banner, bringing together all of the nomadic tribes into one mega civilization, something that has never been done before. Your life has not been easy. Since birth, your life has been a cycle of life and death, with almost everybody you know being involved in battle and dying. This brutal lifestyle was relatively normal for the tribes living in the Mongolian steppe, although it doesn't make it any easier. Through focus and sheer dedication, you have become an extremely powerful leader, and you are close to achieving your goal of unifying all of Mongolia, with now only one obstacle standing in your way. Another great Mongolian warrior named Jamaka, a leader who holds almost opposite values to yours, with the goal of preserving tradition and keeping historic practices alive, specifically focusing on family ties. This opposing leader was also one of your childhood best friends, and someone you considered to be a blood brother, someone who brought stability and joy to your life. Someone who, unfortunately, over the years you had grown apart from due to ideological differences. And now, this battle in which you are about to embark on is the conclusion of your long brewing rivalry, and will solidify a massive change not only in the history of Mongolia, but also in the history of the world. Today is the day you find yourself standing in a battlefield. You and your army are slowly approaching a much larger army, an army that is led by Jamaka. It's hard to not feel confident when you have an army of 66,000 trained warriors. However, when your enemy outnumbers you by multiples, you need to get creative. While your army begins to approach the army of the enemy, you signal your army to spread out as wide as possible. Not only to make your army appear larger than it is, but also to subconsciously encourage the enemy army to do the exact same. As the armies approach closer and closer, you have two extremely long lines of warriors headed directly at each other. And all of a sudden, you signal your entire army with the blow of a horn, a signal you taught them months prior. And at that point, your army collapses from a long army into a narrow, almost arrow formation penetrating the enemy line. This strategy was extremely effective and almost instantly shattered any strategy that Jamaka's army had, and now they are clueless in trying to pick up the pieces. During this bloodshed and confusion, the leaders of the opposing force, including Jamaka, fled, leaving their soldiers essentially abandoned. And it was at this point when you and your army killed who you had to and capture all who were willing to submit. As the sun sets and the dust settles, you reflect on the epic battle that you just embarked on, now with an army that is double the size that you started with. And due to this battle, you are well on your way to unifying the Mongolian people, the goal that started this entire battle in the beginning. And this long-lasting feud with Jamaka, your ex-childhood best friend and current arch-nemesis. The outcome of this battle and unified people led to a seemingly unstoppable army, and the victor of the Battle of the 13 Sides. And what you and your army would go on to achieve would become known as the largest contiguous army in all of human history. And you, who formerly would be known as Temujin, would go on to solidify your name as Genghis Khan. For me, this battle is crazy for a lot of reasons. Not only is it the story of a modest army literally dividing and conquering a much larger army, but it also is essentially the origin story of Genghis Khan, at least as we know him today. Obviously, his younger self, Temujin, has a super interesting and long backstory as well, but that's beyond the scope of this video, specifically about epic battles. And with the birth of Genghis Khan and this new unified Mongolia, we also see the birth of the Mongolian Empire, which, like I mentioned, is the largest contiguous empire in all of history. At its peak, the Mongol Empire ruled over 23.5 million square kilometers of land, or just under 10 million square miles of land, which is insane. Starting with just one man from humble beginnings in the foothills of Mongolia to conquering almost all of Asia and even parts of Europe and the Middle East. For better or for worse, Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire was a force to be reckoned with. And the Battle of the 13 Sides was definitely a catalyst for everything that the Mongol Empire was able to achieve. Oh, in case you were curious, Jamaka, who was able to flee this battle, was later captured and executed. So yeah, not only did fleeing not save his life, it also very likely lost him the battle. This was a pretty crazy battle with some pretty crazy implications, but we're only just getting started. Let's move over a bit west and go a little bit further back in time to discuss an army that was extremely outnumbered and a battle that was fought by an extremely iconic leader. Someone you're definitely gonna recognize. Let's dive right in. The year is 331 BC, and you are standing in Gaugamela, which today is known as Iraq. And you are a great leader from Macedon, an ancient Greek kingdom. And while living over 2,000 years ago, your name still inspires fear to whoever hears it. Your name is Alexander the Great, and you are fighting a seemingly impossible battle. You have an army of 47,000 experienced and trained soldiers, but standing against you in this battlefield is the army of Darius III, the Persian king of kings, and his army of 200,000 dwarfs your skilled yet small army. It is believed that a majority of this large army is essentially underskilled. However, there is strength in numbers, and there is still a good amount of extremely well-trained soldiers included in this massive army fighting for the Persians. This isn't the first time that you, Alexander the Great, are fighting Darius III. However, this battle that we are about to begin is likely the craziest and most important. Previous to this war, you were already campaigning in the Persians' territory to conquer Persia, and obviously Darius was unhappy about this. But with your unwavering dedication to conquer the Persian land, it was only a matter of time until this battle between you and Darius took place. The last battle that you had with Darius 2 years prior, you were victorious in, although Darius was able to escape. And that is something that you're unsatisfied with. And due to the massive size of the Persian Empire, over that 2-year span, Darius was able to reclaim and rebuild an entirely new army, which is exactly who you are fighting today. The battle begins, and the Persian army sends hundreds of chariots directly at your infantry units. The light infantry units were able to bombard the Persian chariots with bows and arrows, slowing them down and weakening their numbers, to the point that when the chariots approached the units further back in your army, they were already significantly damaged. Interestingly, the chariots that were able to survive were able to not only approach your army, but also pass your army and get behind them. But instead of exploiting this vulnerable position that they had just exposed, they instead decided to make a run to your base camp to loot it, which was definitely short-sighted because this led the army much weaker than it needed to be. Like, just imagine you're standing there, you see horses and chariots essentially rushing your position, and as you're huddled there behind your sword and shield, all you hear is the horse running at you and then running by you. And then you turn around and look and you see that they're still going and still going. Now that the Persians' front line was distracted and essentially gone, their army's lack of experience was exposed, and so was their king. And it was at that point when you and your army go for the kill. You and your top soldiers approach King Darius directly, head on. And as you slaughter his army to get closer and closer to him, you notice that he not only steps back, but begins to retreat. Now, unfortunately, as much as you likely wanted to chase him down and execute him yourself, you simply weren't able to, and it was not strategic. However, the retreat of the Persian king led to a mass retreat of the Persian army, completely eliminating their number advantage. Of course, you still had work to do eliminating the soldiers that were able to get past your defenses initially, but at this point, your victory was already secured. With King Darius III nowhere to be found, and the majority of the army eliminated or also on the run, you now had free reign to achieve your goal of conquering the Persian Empire, after ending up victorious in the Battle of Gaugamela. The one battle that ended the Persian Empire. A battle that undoubtedly had a large impact on human history, as Alexander was able to go on and spread Greek ideals and culture across the, at that point, known world. It just makes you think, what if Alexander the Great had lost that battle? I knew I had to put these two stories next to each other just because of, at least to me, the similarities that they had. First of all, being the underdog story, having a much smaller army but still coming out victorious. Secondly, both of these battles involving iconic historic leaders, for better or for worse. And the fact that both of these battles ended in a significant impact on the course of history. Alexander the Great and King Darius definitely weren't childhood best friends, but during this battle, they were definitely mortal enemies. And if you look into some of the other battles that they had previously, it'd be pretty obvious to know why. A small example would be the previous battle they had before this battle of Gargamel, known as the Battle of Isius, ended with a loss for King Darius, but also the capture of his wife, his mother, and his 2 daughters, and the control of southern Asia, specifically modern-day Turkey. So yeah, for the Battle of Gargamel, King Darius was definitely coming back for blood, and I think that's kind of shown by the army of literally over 200,000 soldiers, at least estimated. But yeah, I just find this battle so crazy, and despite being heavily outnumbered, the army of the Macedon emerged victorious due to its obviously superior tactics and pretty clever use of its troops. Whether this was good or bad, I have no input on. I'm referencing these from a historical matter. That being said, let's move on to our next battle. The year is 202 BC. You are currently the most popular living man in Rome. And after campaigning in Spain and coming back to Rome, you, while technically ineligible, become the governor of Sicily, which is a huge deal. And you are at the tail end of the Second Punic War, a war between 2 extremely powerful ancient civilizations, Rome and Carthage. Carthage was a city in North Africa, and they were inspired by Rome and wanted to control trade and land, just like Rome did. The most famous person from Carthage was a man named Hannibal, who led an army of over 40,000 men and literal war elephants from Spain all the way into Italy, going through the Alps, which alone is an insane feat, but that's really only where it begins. After this deadly voyage, they were able to essentially sneak attack the Romans and win some pretty significant battles, like the Battle of Cannae. Hannibal and his army was able to occupy a small part of Italy for almost 16 years, and definitely annoying, but not necessarily damaging Rome itself. So the Romans didn't put their full effort into destroying Hannibal just yet. That's where you come in. Your name is Scipio Africanus. You wanted to put an end to this Hannibal guy once and for all. And while the higher government really wasn't willing to support you in terms of troops, your fame and popularity was able to gather you a large army of volunteers. From these volunteer campaigns, you were able to gather over 7,000 pretty qualified soldiers, many of which were veterans who fought against Hannibal in the Italian countryside and was also fed up with his shenanigans, to say the least. This is where the battle we are about to discuss begins. A battle known as the Battle of Zama. The battle begins with this modest army invading North Africa, with the intention of drawing Hannibal back out of Rome and into Carthage, which was a success. Once Hannibal had returned, he had put together an army that I could only describe as terrifying. Your plan worked perfectly, and Hannibal returned. Unfortunately, he returned with a vengeance and began to put together an army that you couldn't even begin to imagine. The front line of this army that you're about to engage consisted of war elephants, literally an entire line of war elephants. Behind these roughly 80 war elephants stood roughly 4,000 cavalry and 36,000 infantry units, a massive army to say the least. However, you didn't come unprepared either. You, once again, had a modest army, at least comparatively, but you weren't completely outnumbered. Your army consisted of around 24,000 infantry units and 6,000 cavalry units. The battle began from the Carthage side, and you notice a group of war elephants running from the front line, and they're not necessarily running directly at you. They're running in your direction, but slowly turning and turning until they actually run back into their own army. And this is the beginning of the end. It begins to cause a massive disruption within the Carthage army. You instantly command part of your army to take advantage of this huge distraction and begin to attack their vulnerable army that is currently being trampled by their own elephants. It was at this point where you see the other elements from the enemy front line begin running at your army, and this is something you had planned for. These elephants approach your army, but don't run directly into your army, they run into the gaps that your army had made for them, where at that point your army was able to attack and neutralize these battle elephants, which were essentially used as early versions of tanks or battering rams at the very least. After this, it was a face-off of the cavalry, and the Carthaginian and the Roman cavalry met in the center of the battlefield, and resulted in a retreat of Hannibal's and your cavalry chasing directly behind them, leaving only the infantry units behind. Left on the battlefield is your 23,000 troops versus Hannibal's 36,000, and you're on enemy turf. The infantry battle was intense, and resulted in your first line of men essentially holding off the first line of the enemy troops until there was an opening for your men to begin the battle. However, as your first 2 lines of defense were able to essentially eliminate the first 2 lines of the Carthaginian defense, you now have 1 line of men that are injured and tired at best, and Hannibal still has his final line line of defense, which was his most experienced, most talented, and completely fresh army, which hadn't even lifted a finger yet in this entire battle. At this point, you begin to get extremely worried and question if it's even possible that you can win this battle. Sure, their first two lines of defense were eliminated, but now you have an extremely tired and injured army, and they have an untouched line of assassins essentially. So at this point, it doesn't matter that now the numbers have essentially been even, because their numbers were stronger than your numbers. It was at this point when you call your men to retreat and you reorganize them. You put all of your men into one line and put your weakest men in the middle and the strongest on the outside. There wasn't much opportunity for any real strategy or clever tricks. It was an all-out bloodbath, and your army fought Hannibal's army face on, fighting brutally and neither army giving up an inch of space. Their men's obvious experience and lack of wounds was showing, and this battle was not looking good for Rome at all. And you, Scipio, were beginning to assume the worst, when all of a sudden you hear something in the distance that is about to change the course of history. Dashing directly at Hannibal's army from behind was your cavalry units, the same cavalry units that were essentially drawn away by their cavalry units. And they were coming to your rescue, as shortly after chasing their cavalry units, they realized that the point of their cavalry units retreating was to draw them out of the battlefield, to allow their more trained infantry to clean up the Roman army. Ironically, this sort of maneuver was something that Hannibal was known for, and it is a bit ironic that this is the maneuver that led to his downfall. It was at this point that Rome forced Carthage into peace and turned them essentially into a client state. After this war, Carthage had to give up all of its power, land, and resources to Rome, and this led Rome to become one of the most powerful forces in the region and in history ever. And this victory was also a huge step for Rome becoming the massive empire that we still discuss to this day. So yeah, congratulations on you and your men. But this story is undoubtedly crazy. It's wild to think that this battle is only one of many battles in the Punic Wars, and as much as I would love to talk about those, it really goes beyond the scope of this entire video. But if you guys are interested in a video on the craziest wars ever, then we could discuss that. But for the sake of this video, focusing on battles, let's focus back in on the Battle of Zama. I swear I didn't intend on this video being full of underdog stories, but don't be surprised if you're watching this video and the title is The Greatest Underdog Stories in Battle or something along those lines, because honestly, who doesn't love a good underdog story? This battle specifically has a lot of elements of fairy tale battles that just make it so cool. The unlikely leader that rose through the ranks and was able to essentially build his own militia outside of the government, his ambitious plan to take down an entire country, and the noble goal of defeating the person that has been more or less of a nuisance on their home turf for 16 years. That person being Hannibal in Italy, of course. Scipio was undoubtedly a badass, and I'm honestly surprised I haven't heard about him sooner, but I definitely enjoyed learning about his rise to power and this specific victorious battle, where he and Rome were victorious. I also love how part of his underdog story is literally the fact that Rome used Hannibal's war tactics against him once and for all. Like literally after this battle, Carthage was wiped off the face of the earth. But it does make you think though, what if Rome had lost this battle? What would have happened? Hannibal was already on Rome's territory, and they did have a relatively strong army. If Rome hadn't won this battle, there's a chance that we would have never had the Roman Empire. And if that was the case, the world that we live in today would be extremely different. Our language, culture, architecture, money, laws, and so many other things come directly from the Roman Empire. And with this battle potentially being the catalyst of the Roman Empire's success, I think it's safe to say that this battle definitely had an impact on history and that it was undoubtedly a crazy battle. If for no other reason than having war elephants, which is honestly badass. So that's at least 1 point for Hannibal. War elephants, that's pretty sick. Although, as cool as they were ultimately part of their downfall. But I digress. Before we move on to the last battle of this list, I want to make a quick point. Obviously, there is no possible way for me to include every crazy battle throughout history, and if you think that this list is missing an important battle, I'm right there with you. And I encourage you to please drop a comment below about your favorite battle and why you think it deserves a spot on the next list. I say next list because doing research for this video caused me to come up with a plethora of entries that I just couldn't fit on this list. However, if you guys are interested in another video about epic battles throughout history that changed history, please let me know in the comments by saying you want part 2 or even suggesting battles that you think I missed in this video. Now, let's discuss the final battle of this video. And for this last battle, let's go a bit more modern, at least comparatively to these other entries. A battle that is involved in a war that is of personal interest to myself, and I'm assuming many of you guys as well. The year is 1943, and you are a soldier for the Soviet Union, fighting under a man named Joseph Stalin, a person who is not a good person, but he's a better boss than the enemy you're fighting against. This is the Battle of Stalingrad. As a soldier in Stalingrad, you are informed that Germany is planning not only an attack, but a complete takeover of Stalingrad, and over 200,000 Soviet men were sent to slow Germany's advance. All 200,000 of those men died trying to slow Germany's advance. After hearing reports of those men losing their life and the German advance still heading your way, morale was beginning to slip. And before you could even think about what the next plan would be, you hear something from above. It's a German Luftwaffe, a fire attack dropping bombs all over Stalingrad, making a majority of the city rubble and dust. You and your remaining comrades brace for impact as you know that this is only the beginning of a battle, not the end. And soon, you see a German army advance on your position, a position that is extremely compromised. For months, the Germans essentially flooded the destroyed city to continue the battle, and this pile of rubble essentially went from a town to a meat grinder. With things beginning to look even more bleak, if that was even possible, the Soviets had one more trick up their sleeve, and the timing couldn't have been any better. It was a Soviet winter. It was also at this point when the Soviets had come up with the plan to not face the Germans head on, but to try to surround them, which they were successfully able to do, and you and your comrades were able to not only eliminate German soldiers, but circle them, closing them off from any sort of resupplies, which was extremely deadly, as now the Germans were standing in the rubble that they had created, surrounded by Soviets, with absolutely no way of gaining new supplies, or at this point, even intelligence. And with winter arriving, this German army, which was abandoned by Hitler, was left to essentially wither away. Many of these German soldiers froze to death or simply died due to starvation. After enough time had gone on where you and your troops believed that the Germans had to have been snuffed out, you and a group of comrades go to revisit Stalingrad one last time, preparing for a battle, but not sure what you were going to see. Walking through the rubble, you see only emaciated, dead German soldiers and realize that this was successful. And the Soviet victory of this battle was a huge landmark in the downfall of Nazi Germany. It wasn't the final nail in the coffin, but it was one of the first nails in the coffin, for sure. So yeah, not only was this battle extremely deadly, disgusting, and more brutal than we could probably ever even imagine, it's on this list for two reasons. One, obviously because of the historical impact, and two, because of the sheer numbers. The Battle of Stalingrad is not only one of the deadliest and biggest battles in World War II, but also one of the deadliest and biggest battles of all time. And for that reason, I definitely thought I would talk about it in this video. If you know anything about World War II, then you know that the Soviets paid a massive price for their efforts in World War II, in the form of tens of millions of their soldiers. And while their efforts were extremely helpful in defeating the Germans, it did come with that human cost. And this battle is a great example of that. Germans wanted Stalingrad so badly because it was a big industrial city, and it was a key to controlling that region, something that Germany was definitely interested in. Stalin obviously wanted to protect Stalingrad because it was an important city and also because it held his name, something that meant a lot to him. The Battle of Stalingrad was a huge turning point for the war. Not only did it stop Germany's advance into the Soviet Union, but it also gave the US and Britain more hope, which was much needed at this point. After this battle, the Germans began losing more and more, and the Soviets were even able to push them all the way back into Germany, a place that they had at that point expanded far out of. This battle is only a small glimpse into the sheer determination that the Soviet army had, even when fighting in terrible conditions, and how powerful it was in the ultimate destruction of Nazi-occupied Germany. The richest people from every state in the United States of America. Alabama. Jimmy Rain. Jimmy Rain is a 77-year-old billionaire with a net worth of $1.5 billion. What is he known for? Well, he's the founder and CEO of Great Southern Wood Preserving. I guess he's known for popularizing the lumber business by starring the cowboy Yellow Fella in his commercials. Let me know if you've seen this guy. I'm Canadian, so I've never seen the Yellow Fella. And quick fun fact, Jimmy Rain is the only billionaire in Alabama. Alaska. Leonard Hyde. Leonard Hyde is the president of JL Properties, a commercial real estate development company in Anchorage, Alaska. Hyde has a net worth of $400 million and is actually tied for richest person in Alaska with his own business partner, Jonathan Rubini. Rubini is the CEO of JL Properties, and each of them own 50% of JL Properties. The company owns real estate in Anchorage, Florida, and Utah, and in their free time, they like throwing polar bears at poor people. I made that last part up, but it's kind of believable. Arizona. Ernest Garcia II. Ernest Garcia owns Drive Time Automotive, a used car retailer, and he is also the largest shareholder in Carvana, an online used car dealer founded by his own son, Ernest Garcia III. Ernest Garcia II has a net worth of $8 billion. And fun fact, in 1990, he pleaded guilty to bank fraud charges. Really cool stuff. Arkansas. Jim Walton. Jim Walton is the youngest son of Walmart's founder, Sam Walton, and him and his siblings have inherited a total of over $78 billion. Jim sat on Walmart's executive board for over a decade before he gave his seat to his son, and is now the chairman of the family's bank, Everest Bank Group, which has $26 million in assets. I know we're early in the list, but so far he is the first entry in the list who gained his sizable net worth through inheritance. California. Mark Zuckerberg. Zuck has a net worth of over 177 billion and is currently the third richest person in the world. He is the co-founder of Meta, the parent company that owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Threads. Mark became the world's youngest self-made billionaire in 2008 at the age of only 23. I want to make a joke, but that's honestly insane. Mark and his wife Priscilla have pledged to give away 99% of their Meta holdings throughout their lifetime. And Mark, if you're watching, I'd gladly take some. Colorado. Philip Anschutz. I would just like to remind you all that these people, although they're way richer than you or I, they still are just like the rest of us. Philip, for example, puts on his pants one leg at a time, and shits just like everyone else. Get it? And shits. Okay, I spent most of my time on that joke, but Philip built his fortune by discovering an oil field in 1979 and by investing in railroads. He also founded AEG, his entertainment company which owns major sports teams, venues, and the Coachella Music Festival. His net worth is over $15 billion. Connecticut. Stephen Cohen. Cohen is a hedge fund manager and a sports team investor. Cohen currently oversees Point72 Asset Management, a firm with over $35 billion in assets under management. And before this, ran SAC Capital, one of the world's most successful hedge funds ever. Now, he was forced to shut down SAC Capital after he pleaded guilty to insider trading and ended up paying a total of $1.8 billion in penalties. So those two are probably unrelated, but anyways. Cohen also bought the New York Mets in 2020 for $2.4 billion, the highest sale price ever for an MLB team. And throughout the course of his career, Cohen has given over $1 billion to philanthropic causes, including causes related to veterans and children's health. Delaware. Elizabeth Snyder. Snyder is the first woman on this list, and her parents founded W.L. Gore and Associates in 1958, which is a manufacturing company with over 7,000 patents. Their most profitable invention is Gore-Tex, a waterproof fabric that is extremely popular in outdoor gear. Elizabeth owns 5.5% of the company, which does about $2.5 billion a year in sales. One fun fact is that Gore-Tex was actually invented by accident by Elizabeth's brother, who was trying to stretch Teflon. Oh yeah, and she's worth 800 mil. Florida. Jeff Bezos. CEO and entrepreneur, born in 1964, Jeffrey Bezos, who was at one point the second richest man in the entire world and currently has a net worth of over 200 billion. He founded Amazon in 1994 and currently still owns 9% of the company. And one of his most impressive feats was not the fact that he is a space cowboy billionaire, but the fact that his head is incredibly shiny. Good job, Jeff. Georgia. Dan Cathy. Dan Cathy is the chairman of Chick-fil-A, the fast food franchise founded by his father. He grew up doing odd jobs for his dad's restaurant and eventually became the CEO in 2013. And if you know anything about Chick-fil-A, you would know that they've never had any sort of online controversy. Dan is worth over $10 billion. And today, there's over 2,800 Chick-fil-A locations worldwide. Hawaii. Pierre Omidyar. Pierre founded eBay in 1995 and became a billionaire only 3 years later when it went public in 1998. eBay went on to acquire PayPal in 2002 for $1.5 billion. But that's part of a bigger story we'll get into later. He is personally worth over $6 billion. And from 2005 to 2020, Pierre has gifted at least $10 million worth of eBay shares per year, which is pretty cool. Once again, I'm open to receiving shares. Outside of eBay, Pierre also owns a stake in resorts in California and Mexico and is also developing real estate in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico as well. This dude's pretty boring, so let's keep going. Idaho. Frank Vandersloot. Now, hoes and sleuths aside, Frank is very rich. $3.3 billion rich. How, you may ask? Well, he is the founder and former CEO of Melaleuca Inc., an online seller of nutrition and wellness products. And according to Forbes, which is where a lot of this information is coming from, Melaleuca serves over 1 million customers per month, which is interesting because I've never heard of them and their website looks like poop. Illinois. Lucas Walton. If this name sounds familiar, you're not wrong. Lucas is also a member of the Walton family. Yes, that Walton family. Lucas Walton is the grandson of Walmart's founder, and he inherited his fortune when his father unfortunately passed away in a plane crash. He founded Builders Vision in 2021, which is an impact investing group, whatever that means. And he also chairs the Walton Family Foundation's Environment Program Committee, which sounds like a lot of buzzwords. Lucas is worth $28 billion. Indiana. Carl Cook. Carl Cook is the grandson of Captain Cook, and he inherited Captain Cook's fortune. I just realized his name's Captain Hook, not Captain Cook, so that made no sense, but we're keeping it in. Cook's story isn't as cool as Pirate Treasure. He's actually just the CEO of his parents' medical device company, the Cook Group. This company did $2.4 billion in sales last year. Carl Cook's estimated net worth is over $10 billion. Iowa. Harry Stein. First thing I'll say is that I'm glad this guy doesn't share a last name with this YouTuber, but even if he did, I don't think it would matter considering his net worth is almost $10 billion. Stein is an agricultural pioneer and the founder of Stein Seed, a corn and soybean seed company. This company owns around 800 patents to soybean and corn genetics and is one of the world's largest private seed companies through major licensing deals. And a bit of an inspiring fun fact, Stein is dyslexic and mildly autistic as well. Kansas. Charles Koch. Charles's net worth is almost $60 billion, which makes him richer than the last 5 billionaires combined. Charles is the chairman of Koch Inc., which is America's second largest private company by revenue, and it's held that title since 1967. Koch Inc. has done over $125 billion in revenue from its diversified portfolio of companies including pipelines, chemicals, software, automotive components, and even Dixie cups. Kentucky. Tamara Gustafson. Tamara is the heiress of the public storage empire. She made her billions through her family's self-storage business and as a prize-winning horse breeder, of all things. That's not a joke. Her dad co-founded Public Storage in 1972, and she today owns about 10% of the company. Public Storage operates thousands of locations in the US and in Europe. It's really interesting seeing how many people on this list are actually second-generation billionaires. I think we've only covered a few so far that have actually founded the company that's been generating millions. I guess it makes sense considering how large billions are. It may take a generation or two. Louisiana. Todd Graves. Todd Graves is the founder and CEO of Raising Cane's, a fried chicken fast food chain. I'll be honest, I've never tried it. We don't have them in Canada. But I have seen people drink their sauce out of styrofoam cups, so I'm assuming it's pretty good. Graves actually came up with the idea for the restaurant while in college, and his professor gave him the lowest grade in the entire class, and to pursue the idea, he was unable to get bank financing. So he worked as a boilermaker and salmon fisher to save up money. He launched Raising Cane's in 1996 using his savings, and now the company did $3.7 billion in sales last year alone and has over 800 locations in more than 40 states. Todd's net worth is almost $10 billion. Maine. Susan Alphond. Susan's story is actually really inspiring and something we can all aspire to. Harold Alphond founded the Dexter Shoe Company and sold the business to Warren Buffett in 1993 for $420 million in Berkshire Hathaway stock. When Harold died in 2007, his fortune was inherited by his daughter Susan and her 3 siblings. And Susan got a net worth of over $3 billion through inheritance. Wow. Inspiring. Maryland. Annette Lerner. In 1952, Annette lent her 26-year-old husband $250 to start a business. He went on to take that loan from his wife and turn it into one of the largest real estate development companies in the Washington, D.C. area. Through their wealth, the Lerners also bought the Washington Nationals baseball team, and unfortunately, in 2023, Ted Lerner passed away, leaving all of his fortune to his wife, Annette. Really came full circle. She is now worth over $6 billion. Massachusetts. Abigail Johnson. Abigail is the president and CEO of Fidelity Investments, and she currently owns 28.5% of the company. In 2022, she was named the second most successful woman in finance by American Banker and has been recognized for integrating mobile technology and cryptocurrency into the company's initiatives. Fidelity manages discretionary assets totaling over $5.5 trillion in value. And she's also graduated from Harvard, so this girl rocks. And she's also worth $30 billion. Michigan. Daniel Gilbert. At the age of 22 in 1985, Daniel Gilbert founded what would become Quicken Loans, which later became the largest mortgage lender in the entire US. Gilbert took Quicken Loans public as Rocket Companies in August of 2022 and has since originated $79 billion in mortgages since 2023. He also owns the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he and his companies have invested $5.6 billion to purchase and rehab buildings in downtown Detroit with a plan to create 24,000 jobs, which is cool. Gilbert also co-founded the sneaker platform StockX, which is interesting. I can imagine this guy with a $30 billion net worth and co-founding StockX has a pretty cool shoe collection. Nothing like mine though. Just check these out. Minnesota. Glenn Taylor. In 1975, Taylor purchased Carlson Letter Service, a wedding stationery business he worked for in college. He later transformed it into Taylor Corporation, a print services and communications company, which does over $2 billion a year in sales. Taylor also owns stakes in the NBA team, the Timberwolves, the WNBA team, the Lynx, and the United FC soccer team. But he has since sold his stake in both of the basketball companies. I guess billionaires just love buying sports teams. And his net worth is $2.8 billion, which is honestly kind of broke. Mississippi. Thomas and James Duff. The Duff brothers' father founded Tire Mart in 1973 and sold it in 1998. The brothers bought this company back in 2003 and then later started Duff Capital in 2007. The Duff brothers co-founded and co-owned Duff Capital, a holding company which now does over $5 billion a year in revenue with over 20 businesses. Thomas Duff is worth $3 billion. Once again, not sure how this guy's getting by. Missouri. John Morris. No, not John Morrison, the WWE superstar with the crazy physique. John Morris, the old guy, worth $10 billion. Morris is the founder and CEO of Bass Pro Shops, which I'm assuming you've heard of. It's an outdoor gear chain founded in 1972, and he started it out of the back of his father's liquor store, which is pretty cool. The company now does over $8 billion a year in sales, and Bass Pro Shop also acquired Cabela's for $5 billion in 2016. Montana. Dennis Washington. Dennis is a real old money dude. His wealth comes from owning copper mines, marine transportation, and heavy equipment businesses. But he did start from humble beginnings. He worked for his uncle's construction company and then later took out a $30,000 loan to start his own construction company, which he later turned into Washington Companies, which owns the copper mines and everything I just mentioned. He also invested in his son's company, C-Span Corp, which is a shipping container company that now has over 150 shipping containers, which is pretty cool. Dennis is worth $7 billion. I find it funny that this guy's a billionaire from mining copper because you don't have to dig underground for it. You can literally just find it in people's houses for free. Nebraska. Warren Buffett. No, not Warren Buffet. Warren Buffett, the billionaire, with a current net worth of around $133 billion. Buffett is one of the most successful investors ever, gathering his huge fortune through Berkshire Hathaway, his investment company, which owns brands like Geico, Dairy Queen, Duracell, and many others. And although this guy's a billionaire, he's pretty well known for being cheap. I'm pretty sure he still lives in a house that he bought for under 100 grand. In the last interview I saw with him, he drives an old Honda and eats McDonald's every day. So at least some of you can say you have something in common with a billionaire. He's promised to donate over 99% of his wealth, and so far he's given away over 60 billion. Shout out to Warren. Also, he's the 6th richest man in the world at the time of recording this. Nevada. Miriam Adelson. Take a wild guess. I blurted out. What is the richest person in Nevada rich from? Did you guess gambling? Because you're right. Although they weren't doing the gambling, they were profiting from the losses of your gambling, specifically your dad's crippling gambling addiction, which is the reason why you are currently having student loans. Miriam inherited her husband's fortune after he passed away in 2021, and she now owns over 50% of the Las Vegas Sands, a casino company that is valued over $34 billion. She's also bought a majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks from Mark Cuban in 2023, and before becoming a billionaire, she was actually a medical doctor as well, which is pretty cool. She is currently worth $35 billion. New Hampshire. Rick Cohen. Pretty sure this is the second Cohen we've had on this list, so there's that. Most of Cohen's wealth comes from Symbiotic, which is a warehouse automation company that partnered with Walmart to automate all of its distribution centers. He also owns C&S Wholesale Grocers, which is the largest grocery wholesaler in the US, with an annual revenue of over $33 billion. Rick is worth almost $20 billion personally. New Jersey. Rocco Commisso. Commisso is the founder and CEO of Mediacom, the 5th largest cable TV provider in the US. Commisso immigrated to America from Italy in 1962 at the age of 12, and his first job was playing the accordion during the movie theater intermissions. Talk about humble beginnings. New Mexico. Ron Corio. Just gonna give a quick poverty trigger warning because Ron is only worth $1.7 billion. I know, embarrassing. On a serious note, Corio became New Mexico's first ever billionaire through Array Technologies, a solar tracking systems business he founded himself, which is cool to hear because there's been a surprising amount of inheritance on this list. He served as CEO of this company up until 2022 when he resigned right before the company's IPO, which is, to me, questionable. New York. Michael Bloomberg. Besides serving 12 years as New York City's mayor and running an unsuccessful presidential campaign, Michael Bloomberg co-founded Bloomberg LP in 1981, a media company and financial firm that has an estimated yearly revenue of over $13 billion. He's pretty philanthropic too. He gave away $3 billion in 2023 alone and has donated more than $17.4 billion in his lifetime to gun safety, climate change, and education, and a few other causes as well. Nice job, Mike. North Carolina. James Goodnight. This is by far my favorite name on the list. Mr. Goodnight definitely has a ring to it. If any of you want to call me that, feel free. James co-founded his analytical software firm in 1976. The software they developed is used to analyze agricultural agricultural data. And right now, the software is used by more than 80,000 organizations around the world, and the company brings in over $3 billion a year. Outside of this, Goodnight and his partner Saul, who is also a billionaire, have co-founded a private school, a country club, and a hotel. North Dakota, Gary Tharizald. Gary's a bit of a G. Look at this picture. This is the real picture on Forbes. Dude put a license plate on his ass. We'll let it slide because he's a billionaire. Although just barely. His net worth is $1.2 billion. But he is North Dakota's only billionaire. In 1982, he purchased his first Super 8 motel, and since then he has built, owned, and operated over 480 hotels nationwide, which is pretty impressive. I'm sure you've at least seen a Super 8 motel, and if you've been unfortunate enough, you've maybe even slept in one too. Ohio. Les Wexner. Wexner founded L Brands, which is a global retail empire that includes Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, Abercrombie & Fitch, and more. Wexner got his start in 1963 when he used a $5,000 loan to start his own store, The Limited, which sold only shirts and pants. Two fun facts about this guy. One is that he bought Victoria's Secret for only $1 million in 1982 when it was just a small failing chain in San Francisco. And second fun fact, his ex-financial advisor was Jeffrey Epstein. Cool stuff. Who knew the guy selling women's panties would be associated with such weirdos? Oklahoma. Harold Hamm. Another banger of a name. Harold is the founder and chair of Continental Resources, one of the nation's largest independent oil companies. Ham started from humble beginnings, and I'm not even making this up, it says it on Forbes. He got his start picking cotton barefoot as a child and working at a gas station at the age of 16 to help support his family. He started a trucking company that hauled water to and from oil fields, and in 1971 he took it alone to drill his first well. And as you can tell, it went pretty well. So yeah, oil and gas billionaire. Let's keep going. Oregon. Phil Knight. Knight co-founded Nike in 1964 with Bill Bowerman. Although he retired in 2016, Knight and his family still own 20% of Nike, which, if you didn't know, earned $51 billion last year. Knight personally is worth almost $41 billion. Knight and his wife Penny have donated $3.6 billion to charity so far, but he still kind of looks like a supervillain, so yeah. Pennsylvania. Jeffrey Yass. Jeffrey Yass, no joke, got his start as a professional gambler, and I'm just gonna leave it there because I think that says it all. Gambling will make you a billionaire and the richest man in your state. Do it now. And if you want a little bit more info, he owns a trading company now, which is one of the biggest trading companies in the world, whatever, and they own 7% of ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, and he's worth $27 billion. But the most important part is that he's a pro gambler, which means that you can do it too if you start today. I hate the fact I need to do this, but I think I need to explicitly say that I am joking and being sarcastic about the gambling. Most gamblers give up right before they win big, so the chance of you becoming a billionaire is low because you likely don't have what it takes to stick with it. Rhode Island. Jonathan Nelson. Nelson has a net worth of $3.4 billion and founded Providence Equity Partners in 1989, where he was CEO up until January 2021. His firm has invested in over 170 companies, including Hulu, Warner Brothers Media, and the Yankees. South Carolina. Robert Faith. Faith is a real estate billionaire with a net worth of around $5 billion. He founded and is currently CEO and chairman of Greystar, which is a real estate investment company and investment management platform with over $34 billion in assets under development. South Dakota. T. Denny Stanford. Stanford owns First Premier Bank, which is a bank that specializes in offering credit cards to high-risk borrowers. His bank has 17 branches and is one of the largest issuers of MasterCards, many with steep rates and low limits. Predatory credit business aside, he is an active philanthropist, stating that he wants to die broke and saying he'll do this by giving away his credit company. So, kind of a G. Tennessee. Thomas Frist Jr. Thomas is a former Air Force flight surgeon that later went on to found Hospital Corp of America with his father in 1968. The company now owns and operates over 168 hospitals around the world and around 2,400 sites of care in 20 US states and the UK. Frist is worth over $30 billion. Texas. Elon Musk. I don't think this man needs any introduction as he's not only the richest man in Texas, he's the richest man in the entire world. Elon Musk is the co-founder of 7 different companies, including Tesla, SpaceX, and XAI. Say what you want about the guy, but he is extremely efficient and the level of success he's been able to create is almost unfathomable. Musk has a net worth of over $200 billion and is one of the younger billionaires on this list at the young age of only 52 at the time of recording this video. Utah. Gail Miller. I really wanted Gail Lewis to be on this list, but unfortunately, after she retired from Walmart, her net worth fell to second richest in her state. Miller owns the Larry H. Miller Group, which has interests in real estate, healthcare, finance, and entertainment businesses. I find it funny that they say interests. It's like, oh, they're just interested in it. They just have billions of dollars, but it's just an interest. They're not doing it. They're They're just interested with billions. The Millers initially gained their money by starting with a single Toyota dealership and then growing their dealer group to being the 8th largest in the entire company before selling it for $3.2 billion. They later went on to purchase the Utah Jazz for $22 million in 1986 and sold the team in 2020 for $1.66 billion. Not a bad return. Vermont. John Abel. Abel co-founded medical device company Boston Scientific in 1979. Abel took his company public in 1992 and was listed as a billionaire officially in 1996. It doesn't seem like he's done much since that listing, as his net worth today is only $1.9 billion, but since 2001, he has donated over $130 million to charity, which is pretty cool. Virginia. Jacqueline Mars. Jacqueline is the granddaughter of Mars Incorporated founder Frank C. Mars, and she owns an estimated 1/3 of the iconic candy company. I don't want to give it away, but there may be somebody else who owns another third who may be the richest person in another state, but we'll get into that later. Washington. Bill Gates. Gates does a lot of stuff now, which I don't really want to get into, but he got his start by founding Microsoft, which is now valued in the trillions of dollars. With that being said, he only owns about 1.3% of Microsoft at this point, which is still insane. His current net worth is just over $100 billion. And one of the cooler things about him is this mugshot when he got pulled over for speeding in his brand new Porsche 911. Good choice. West Virginia. Brad Smith. West Virginia seriously needs to get their money up and not their funny up, because their richest person isn't even a billionaire. I know, laughable. His net worth is $900 million, so you're getting close, buddy. Brad Smith has served as the CEO of Inuit Softwares from 2008 to 2018, and then served as chairman up until 2022. Wisconsin. John Menard Jr. Menard Jr. founded Menards, the third largest home improvement chain in the US after Home Depot and Lowe's. The company has over 300 locations and did over $13 billion in 2023. John has a personal net worth of $25 billion, and the junior in his name is actually short for Junior Bacon Cheeseburger. Wyoming. John Mars. I told you he'd come back. Can you guess where his money came from? And can you guess his net worth? Well, it was already on screen, so. John Mars' net worth is $38.5 billion, and his net worth also comes from the Mars family fortune. Congrats, bro. If you're anything like me, you grew up playing Call of Duty. And one Call of Duty that always stood out specifically was Call of Duty World at War. This game was undoubtedly the catalyst for my fascination with the Second World War. And recently, while doing one of my late night History Channel binges, I came across some really interesting weapons. So in this video, I put together a list of some of the weirdest and most obscure weapons from World War II. Oh, and these are going to start weird, but get even weirder. First up, we have the Krumlauf, which is a German invention. The Krumlauf itself is not a weapon, but it is a weapon modifier. The Krumlauf is a barrel extension for rifles, similar to a suppressor, although this one was curved with a 30-degree angle. Although it seems like something out of Looney Tunes, the purpose was quite ingenious. The Krumlauf was used for close quarters combats in urban situations, specifically shooting around corners and over trenches. The Krumlauf wasn't typically blind fired, as it also had a periscope attached to it to also see around the corners. As useful as this item may appear, it wasn't extremely practical because it had a few major downsides, mainly accuracy and durability. The periscope typically fastened with the Krumlauf was very susceptible to fogging up, which left huge room for inaccuracy, and the Krumlauf itself was very susceptible to the immense forces behind a bullet, not only controlling the bullet but also redirecting that bullet, and they typically were only good for a maximum of 300 shots. Personally, I think the look of the Krumlauf is one of the weirdest things about it. I think the idea isn't bad, it's just wasn't able to be executed properly. The Krumlauf is weird, but there's definitely weirder, which is why it's only the first entry on this list. Next up, we have the V3 Supergun, and super it is. The V3 Supergun was developed as a so-called vengeance weapon in order to strike back at London as Allied bomber fleets pounded German cities to rubble. The V3 cannon was capable of delivering a 140 kilogram shell at a range of over 161 kilometers. But big deal, right? Wow, a cannon that could shoot a little bit further. What's so special? Well, one of the most unique attributes about the V3 Supergun is how it achieved this enormous range, and its unique engineering. The secret to this enormous range and what made this gun truly special was the number of side channels attached to the 140-meter long barrel. These channels were filled with additional propellant, which would be triggered by the shell as it traveled through the long barrel. Essentially, what would happen is the shell would trigger the propellant as it would fly down the barrel, which would cause the propellant to explode, giving even more velocity. The long barrel with these channels would essentially allow the shell to be fired multiple times without even leaving the barrel. The best analogy I can think of is when you're playing Mario Kart and you drive on a speed boost. That's basically what's happening inside the barrel. To me, the engineering behind this concept is really interesting, but the weirdest weirdest part is definitely the fact that the barrel was literally almost 500 feet long. Despite all the research, development, and resources that were put into this weapon, it wasn't really able to be executed properly. During some demo tests, it wasn't able to meet its hypothetical potential, and before they were able to truly implement it, they were destroyed by the Allied forces bombing and destroying the gun. Later, smaller variants were used on bombing raids against Luxembourg, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about, however, is something the Russians did that I don't like at all. And you're not gonna like it either. That being anti-tank dogs. Yeah, this one is exactly how it sounds, unfortunately. The Russians were strapping bombs to dogs for them to detonate under tanks. How they do this? Well, in training, they would starve these dogs and then hide food under stationary tanks so the dogs would know to look under tanks for food. They would then bring these same dogs to the battlefield with bombs strapped on their backs. The idea was that the dog would run under an enemy tank and then the bomb on its back would explode. Besides this being extremely primitive and brutal, this technique was also extremely ineffective. On the battlefield, these dogs were extremely scared of these tanks charging towards them, and combined with enemy fire, they wanted nothing to do with these enemy tanks. Also, some of these dogs would go back towards Russian tanks, hiding below them, causing friendly fire. Overall, this method is completely horrible and honestly not great. This technique is pretty on point for Russian military exercises, as their whole mentality is essentially throw bodies at something until the problem's solved. But anyway, staying on trend with explosive animals, we have our next entry, which is explosive rats. This one is interesting because it was a failure that actually turned into a pretty massive success. The British military weapons design team was looking for interesting ways to infiltrate the German infrastructure. Obviously, they were getting desperate because where they landed was explosive rats. This differs from the explosive dogs because these rats were no longer alive. The rats were found, killed, skinned, and essentially taxidermied but filled with a plastic explosive. These rats would be planted in and around coal storages on German bases with the intention of having them be thrown in the incinerator and boilers, triggering the explosive and causing a massive explosion. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Germans early on caught on to these explosive rats, and the British, because of this, stopped producing them. But Germany didn't know that, and because of that, the Germans were extremely paranoid about more explosive rats and spent a lot of resources and man-hours strictly checking rats, dead and alive, on all of their military bases. Despite the fact that the rats were more effective than the dogs, and I would say arguably less upsetting, I wouldn't say that this method is much better. For our third and final animal-based entry on the list, we have pigeon-guided missiles. Yep, you heard me right. Pigeon-guided missiles. But unfortunately, it's not as cool as it sounds. The birds that your grandma likes to throw bread at isn't also a double agent. Their primitive brains were just used for tracking, which is still pretty interesting. B.F. Skinner was a psychologist and a passionate pigeon trainer who believed that pigeons could be useful weapons of war. He was ultimately able to prove his theory right, as he was able to teach pigeons how to recognize targets and aim weapons accordingly. The pigeons had specially designed cockpits inside of these missiles which allowed them to peck their way to pick the direction they wanted the missile to go, pecking up, down, left, or right to control the missile accordingly. It's strange and insane to think that pigeons can be trained to literally guide missiles, but it's also kind of unfortunate that these birds were unintentional kamikazes. What was intentional, however, was our next entry, the Japanese Fugu balloon bomb. These bombs were extremely primitive in nature, being constructed solely out of paper. These paper bombs were huge, 33 feet in diameter for the most part, and could lift up to 1,000 pounds, but all they were lifting were 33-pound anti-personnel fragmentation bombs. The Japanese released these bombs into the Pacific jet stream, which would silently carry these large devices from Japan to the US without any pilot, and the trip would take several days. Despite releasing thousands of these devices, the balloon bomb was extremely ineffective, not to mention resource intensive. It took up to 30 minutes to an hour to prepare one balloon and required 30 hands on deck to create one. During the war, there was only 6 casualties reported from the balloon. A minister's wife and 5 Sunday school children were on a fishing trip encountered the balloon near Oregon, and sadly they fell victim to it. Although for this weapon to be considered successful, it would mean the death of people, which is obviously unfortunate. It is kind of laughable how ineffective this weapon was, considering all the time and energy that went into it. Finally, we have the last entry of this list, the Pajantrum. The Pajantrum never saw combat, but for reasons we'll get into, was a fan favorite amongst civilians. The best way to describe the Bajandrum is a British-made rocket-powered wagon wheel battering ram, if that makes sense. To find a way to breach Germans' concrete defenses in Normandy, the British military devised a large carriage-like contraption called the Bajandrum. The device was propelled by rockets attached along the rim on the outside of the wheel, and in the middle there was a drum full of explosives. The goal was to have the Bajandrum speed towards the wall and break through it and eventually explode. The concept sounds simple enough and honestly kind of makes sense if you don't really think about it, but the biggest problem facing the Bajandrum was the fact that there are so many technical inconsistencies and issues. Rockets blowing off, the wheel going in the wrong direction, not generating enough force to penetrate the concrete wall. Although the general public enjoyed watching the live demonstrations of the Bajandrum, it was never brought to battle due to all of the technical inconsistencies of it. Besides the fact that all of these weapons were complete and utter failures, they all have one thing in common. They are weird. And they sucked. But cryptids from every state in the United States of America. Alabama. One of the most famous cryptids in Alabama is known as the White Thang, or the White Thang of Alabama. Supposedly, the White Thang is the most famous cryptid from Alabama. The creature has been spotted throughout the 1990s, and the local news, WAFF48, has published articles discussing it. One of the articles discussed how the White Thang and the Sasquatch are different, but how they may be potentially distantly related. Oh, yeah, and if you can tell by the pictures on screen, White Thang is essentially just a big Bigfoot, but he's white, hence the name. Alaska. One of the most interesting cryptids from Alaska is known as Tizarok, and it is believed to be a sea serpent reported from the subarctic coastal waters of King and Nunavut Islands in the Bering Sea, off the Pacific coast of Alaska. People that have claimed to see Tizarok typically claim to either only see their head and neck or occasionally the tail. Therefore, the general form of this animal is unknown, but it can allegedly rise out of the water almost 7 to 8 feet. Its head is snake-like and its tail is flippered, but the Tezerek has also been described as a giant caterpillar or worm-like creature. This is essentially the Loch Ness Monster of Alaska. There isn't really much known about this creature, but I thought it would be more interesting than another Bigfoot variant, just so this list isn't full of them. Arizona, the Mogollon Monster. The Mogollon Monster is commonly described as a large bipedal creature, which means it walks on 2 feet. Originally, I thought that meant it had 2 penises, but it turns out he's not that cool. It's also described as being over 7 feet tall with large red eyes. Its body is said to be covered with long black or reddish brown hair, with the exclusion of hair on its chest, face, feet, or hands. Reports claim it also has a strong pungent odor like dead fish, skunk, bad body odor, or even decaying peat moss or the musk of a snapping turtle. Some people claim that the creature is allegedly nocturnal, omnivorous, and territorial, and sometimes violent. In numerous reports, the monster has been said to emit a blood-curdling scream, described as sounding like a woman in great distress. The Mogollon Monster is also known as the Arizona Bigfoot, and is really just an interesting variant of Bigfoot with very similar qualities. Arkansas, the White River Monster. An urban legend in Arkansas is known as the White River Monster, and it's a large creature reportedly first spotted off the banks of the White River near Newport, Arkansas. The White River Monster is reported as having gray skin and as wide as a car and as long as 3 cars. And as news reports spread about this monster, the city began construction on a huge rope and net, but the program actually ended due to a lack of materials and funding. The creature was first spotted in 1915 and is even believed to have an impact on the Civil War. During the Civil War, the White River was used often for transportation, and the monster is supposedly blamed for overturning a boat. The monster was notably spotted again in 1937 and 1971, and there's over 100 confirmed sightings from 1915 to present day. Basically, one of your run-of-the-mill interesting river cryptids. California, the Dark Watchers. I actually have mentioned the Dark Watchers before on my channel, but I like them, so I'm going to mention them again. Oh, and the video I talked about them in is Scariest Mythical Creatures from Around the World, Part 3. The Dark Watchers are tall, sometimes giant-sized, featureless dark silhouettes often seen wearing brimmed hats or even carrying walking sticks. They're only seen during sunrise or sunset, and they are motionless, watching travelers from the horizon, typically seen along the Santa Lucia mountain range. The legend states that no one has been able to see them up close, and if you approach them, they vanish. These are harmless cryptids, and some believe they are simply a reminder that you are not alone in these woods, and to respect nature and your surroundings, or to be aware at all times. They serve as more or less of a gentle warning, and although creepy, I think they're pretty cool. Colorado, Slide Rock Bolter. Slide Rock Bolter is a really strange cryptid from lumberjack folklore, primarily during the 19th and 20th centuries. It is a creature that is believed to live in the mountains of Colorado, but only on mountains with a slope at an angle greater than 45 degrees. It has a huge head, small eyes, a big mouth, and a tail similar to a dolphin with big grab hooks. The best way to describe this cryptid is honestly just a big land land whale that slides down mountains to eat people. This creature is said to have caused great unease amongst tourists visiting the mountains of Colorado, and it will often remain motionless for days at a time until groups of tourists walk by its path. At that point, it will release its hooks from the top of the mountain and slide down the mountain to gulp up the entire group of tourists, or at least so the legend goes. This is definitely an interesting cryptid, but it's kind of funny. And if you plan on going to the mountains of Colorado soon, make sure you get your protractor out to make sure the angle is less than 45 degrees. Or at least look out for any whale-looking things up the mountain. Connecticut, the melonheads. The melonheads are actually a folklore that exists in Ohio, Michigan, and Connecticut, but for this segment, we're only going to be focusing on the ones in Connecticut. The melonheads are described as small humanoid beings with bulbous heads who occasionally emerge from hiding places and attack people. That's the basic gist. But in Connecticut specifically, according to one telling of the myth, Fairfield County was the location of an asylum for the criminally insane that burned down in the fall of 1960, resulting in the death of all of the staff and most of the patients, except for 10 to 20 inmates unaccounted for, which supposedly had survived and escaped into the woods. The legend states that the melonheads' appearance is a result of them resorting to cannibalism in order to survive the harsh winters in the region and inbreeding, which caused their heads to swell up and deform. Less of a cryptid, more of like a fairy tale, mythical creature thing. If I haven't made it obvious yet, I'm kind of using the terms interchangeably. But yeah, that's the melonheads. Definitely strange. Delaware, the pukwudgie. If there's any Exploring with Josh fans watching this video, you might be familiar with the pukwudgie. Pukwudgies are mythical creatures with shape-shifting abilities, also known for luring people to their deaths using magic and attacking people with poison arrows. They may seem initially friendly, but they turn hostile towards humans. Legend warns against annoying them while they are being friendly, as they retaliate with mischief and harm. Pukwudgie itself roughly translates to little man of the woods that vanishes. And as far as appearance goes, looks like a human-like creature, albeit much shorter, much hairier, and sometimes seen either naked or with very primal-esque clothing. So if you're ever in Delaware or even live in Delaware, make sure you watch out for little elf-looking, mischievous little guys in the woods. Florida, the muck monster. In late August of 2009, two members of a nonprofit called Lagoon Keepers were attempting to remove what they thought were a log from the Lake Worth Lagoon in Palm Beach, Florida. That log proceeded to give the two nonprofit members a runaround of the entire lake, diving deep whenever the boat came within 10 feet of it. During the chase, one of the men called this monster the elusive muck monster. Then the other man filmed the encounter and put it online. The news picked up the story and the city quickly took note and did almost everything they could to profit off of the situation. T-shirts were sold, specialty drinks were made in bars, and the city even installed viewfinders along the water. The only real visual that we have on this creature is its wood-like appearance from part of its back poking through the water briefly, which to me seems similar to a snapping turtle, but who knows. So anyways, this creature did end up being pretty good publicity and a decent boost in tourism, which is kind of funny. But as far as the cryptid goes, there's not much information. Georgia, Altamahaha, or Alti. Basically just the Loch Ness Monster of Georgia. It's believed to live in small streams and abandoned rice fields, and sightings are few and far between. There's not a ton of information about this besides the fact that it's extremely similar to the Loch Ness Monster, supposedly. But yeah, this one's kind of uninspired. Moving on. Hawaii. Menehune. Okay, this one's actually cool. Menehune are essentially small dwarves that live in the valleys and rural areas of Hawaii, hidden far, far away from human settlements. The Menehune are also described as superb craftspeople, building temples, fish ponds, roads, canoes, and houses. Some of these structures that Hawaiian folklore attributed to the Menehune existing. They were said to be in Hawaii before settlers from Polynesia migrated many centuries ago. Their favorite food is banana, but they also like fish. Legend has it is that the Menehune only appear during night, and that is when they spend their hours crafting masterpieces. Not much more is known about the Menehune, but I think they're pretty cool dudes. They're just doing their thing, living in a cool place, building cool stuff. You can't hate that. Good job, Hawaii. That's a cool cryptid, or folklore, or mythical creature, or whatever. Idaho. Charlie. Charlie, much like Alti, is basically just a Loch Ness Monster dupe not worth mentioning. Sorry, Idaho. Do better. I honestly thought they would have some sort of potato monster, and maybe they do, but I didn't see it. Illinois. The Enfield Horror. This creature is described as having 3 legs, a short body, 2 short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stands at 4.5 feet tall and is grayish in color. It's definitely a gross and droopy looking creature, and it's honestly pretty creepy as well. Its first sighting was in the early 1970s in the small town of Enfield, Illinois, hence the name. During one of the first sightings, a very convincing story got out and got media attention, and this caused a lot of hunters to become excited about the prospect of finding and killing the Enfield Horror. For a while, tourists traveled and hunters began hunting, both looking for this gray creature in the woods. All of these hunts were unsuccessful, and as the hunting and tourism enthusiasm died down, 4 more sightings were reported since. Indiana. Mesha Kennebec, also known as the Manitow Monster, is an Indiana cryptid that is said to live in Lake Manitow for over centuries, being spotted by Native Americans and early settlers. By those who have seen it, it's been described as 60 feet long with the head of a bull with a serpent body. It is more or less of your run-of-the-mill lake monster, but it wasn't an exact ripoff of the Loch Ness Monster, so I thought I'd give it a bit more attention. Pretty cool, and the Native American ties are always interesting because their folklore is great, but that's about all I got. Iowa. Van Meter Monster. The Van Meter Monster is reported to be a 9-foot-tall winged bat-like creature, also known as the Van Meter Visitor. This creature was said to shoot light from its horns and is immune to bullets. Witnesses made plaster casts of its 3-toed footprints after a confrontation. The creature has been seen disappearing into a nearby coal mine, and similar sightings have continued up until the 2010s. Today, there is even a commemorative event, and it's held around the anniversary of the sightings. Pretty cool. I like that it gets the community together. It seems scary. Kind of reminds me of Mothman. 8 out of 10. Let's keep going. This video is kind of evolving, so now it's more... now I'm just ranking these guys. Okay. If I lose any more brain cells, this might just end up being a tier list. Kansas. Deer Woman. Deer Woman, or sometimes known as Deer Lady, is a spirit from Native American mythology. She can be seen in 2 forms, either a beautiful young woman with deer feet or just a deer. And her general vibe can kind of shift depending on the context of who she's dealing with, but for the most part, she has her sights set on men who have harmed women and children, and to them, she is vengeful and murderous, typically known for luring these men to their death. Overall, Deer Woman's got a pretty cool vibe. Good job, Kansas. Kentucky. The Pope Lick Monster. Yeah, you heard that right. We're already off to a weird start. The Pope Lick Monster. Unfortunately, this monster is not known for licking the Pope, but it doesn't get much better. Pope Lick Monster, or more commonly known as Goat Man, is a legendary part man, part goat, and even part sheep creature, reported to live beneath the railroad that goes over Pope Lick Creek in Fisherville, Louisville, Kentucky. Legends about the Goat Man claim that it uses hypnosis and voice mimicry to lead trespassers on its bridge either onto the tracks in the way of a oncoming train or to below the bridge where it can attack them with a blood-stained axe. Typically, Goatman would make its voice sound like the voice of either someone else or even potentially someone familiar to you, making you want to see who's talking to you and where they are. Some legends state that Goatman is so vengeful because he was treated so poorly during his lifetime for being such a different creature, at least different by human standards. And some legends state that Goatman is simply a reincarnation of a farmer who made a deal with the devil. Either way, he's definitely strange looking, and if you're passing by a bridge in Pope Lick, Kentucky, don't lick the Pope, don't go under the bridge, don't go over the bridge, and if you hear somebody you think you know, you don't. Get out of there. Louisiana. Fille Fouillée. To describe what you're looking at, let me give you a bit of context. The story of Fille Fouillée starts in Acadia. Legend states that there was a blacksmith named Will Smith. No, not Will Smith. Will Smith. And when Will Smith died and went up to heaven, he was given a second chance at life. But that second life he lived was not a good one. Unfortunately, he chose to do evil this time around. Because of this, the second time he died, the devil doomed him to live on Earth forever with only a single coal to warm him. That is why this cryptid or spirit is only really seen as a dimly lit orb in the distance. There is typically no figure associated with this creature. Fille Fouillée spends his time in the swamps of southern Louisiana trying to lure people out deep into the swamp to their death. It is advised that anybody near the swamp at night avoid following any strange dim lights in the distance, as the ending is never truly good. Maine. Kawakwa. Kawakwa is a cryptid from Abenaki folklore from northeastern United States, specifically Maine. The creature is described as a giant, cannibalistic, half-animal, half-human creature that roamed the forests of present-day New England in ancient times. The Kawakwa is described as being a former human whose heart turned to ice, either because of evil spirit possession or because they committed a crime that was truly dreadful, like cannibalism. The only sensation the Kawakwa is able to feel is an insatiable hunger, and their existence is pretty pitiful. They are no longer claimed to exist, so there is no risk to you or me, but if you have a time machine and go back to ancient times and decide to go to New England of all places, look out for the Kawakwa. It may want to eat you. And by may want to eat you, I mean he will lick and nibble you from head to toe. Maryland. Chessie. Can you guess what this creature is going to be? Did you guess another Loch Ness Monster type creature? Could you guess because the name is completely uninspired? Well, congratulations, you have a functioning brain. Chessie, not to be confused with Nessie as in the Loch Ness Monster, as in the cool one, is a reptilian type creature that is reported to be either black or brown that has been seen as early as 1936 in the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Not gonna go too deep on this one, pretty uninspired. Loch Ness Monster clone, Salmonella clone. Sorry, Maryland. Let's keep going. Massachusetts. Thunderbirds. The Thunderbird is a legendary creature, especially if you're a North American indigenous person who's really into art and culture. The Thunderbird is considered to be a supernatural being with supernatural power and strength. A Thunderbird can be best described as a very large eagle with supernatural powers. Some of those powers being the ability to create thunder by simply flapping its wings, and also the ability to cause lightning by flashing its eyes. The Thunderbird has very deep ties to indigenous people's history and culture, and for that reason, the history and lore is deep, and I'm definitely doing it a disservice by going over it this quickly, but it's pretty cool. 10 out of 10. Good job, Massachusetts. Michigan. The Michigan Dogman. The Michigan Dogman is essentially the Michigan equivalent of a werewolf, but it's still kind of cool. The Michigan Dogman is a cryptid that was allegedly witnessed in 1887 in the lower peninsula of Michigan. It is described as being a 7-foot tall, blue or amber-eyed bipedal canine with the torso of a man and a fearsome howl that sounds like a human screaming. According to the legend, the Michigan Dogman only appears in a 10-year cycle that falls on years ending in 7. For example, 2007, 2017, 2027. The majority of these sightings have taken place in the southern part of Michigan. And for as how ferocious and scary the Dogman may seem, many believers say that the Dogman can be scared away simply by clapping at it, which is kind of hilarious. Oh, and if you're able to scare away the Dogman without using your hands, give me a call. Only because I totally might need you to save me one day. Minnesota. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is by far one of the most well-known mythical creatures, folklore creatures, urban legends, cryptids, whatever you want to call it. If you're watching this video, you probably know about it. And honestly, for good reason. It's cool looking, the lore is deep, and it might even be real. I've already discussed it on the channel, but I'm gonna describe it again because it's really cool and I know you guys want to hear it. For starters, the Wendigo isn't just from Minnesota, it's kind of from all over the place, all across North America. I felt it was best fitting here because Minnesota was kind of slim pickings, and it was a good middle ground between all of the possible locations Wendigos could be from. The Wendigo is often said to be a malevolent spirit, sometimes depicted as a creature with human-like characteristics which possesses humans. The victims of the Wendigo feel an insatiable hunger and have the desire to eat other humans and commit horrible murders often. In some representations, the Wendigo is described as a giant humanoid with a heart of ice and whose approach is signaled by its foul stench and sudden, unseasonable chill. If this sounds familiar, it's likely because we just spoke about the Kawakwa, which is a very similar creature with its hunger and heart of ice. And I'm not sure who came first, the chicken or the egg, but I know that the Wendigo is a lot more popular. Wendigos are definitely scary and super interesting cryptids, and I would recommend looking into them deeper or maybe watching this video about mythical creatures that mentions the Wendigo. But for the scope of this mega compilation, I'm gonna cut it here. Great job, Minnesota. Mississippi. The Pascagoula River Aliens. The Pascagoula River Aliens aren't just any aliens. They are the aliens associated with the pretty famous UFO sighting and alien abduction account from 1973. For context, on the evening of October 11th, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker told the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office that while they were out fishing, they not only saw aliens but were abducted by them. They claimed that the aliens paralyzed them but kept them conscious and examined them for hours before later releasing them. This isn't about the abduction, but actually about the aliens themselves. These aliens were described as having robotic slit mouths and crab-like pincers. They had more or less of a humanoid body commonly associated with gray-ish aliens, but these ones seemed just a little bit different. You be the judge if specific aliens count as cryptids, but in my case they do, and honestly Mississippi was kind of dry, so I thought this was interesting. Shout out Pascagoula. Missouri. The Ozark Howler. The Ozark Howler, unsurprisingly, is said to live in the dense forests of the Ozarks, which span across Missouri, Arkansas, and Kansas. But for this segment, we're focusing on the howlers that live specifically in Missouri. The howler is typically described as being bear-sized, with a thick body, stocky legs, and black, shaggy hair, accompanied with glowing red eyes and prominent horns. Its cry is often described as being the combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's bugle, also combined with the laugh of a hyena. Sounds like a pretty horrible trio. The howler is said to be a fierce hunter and a protector of the wilderness, also with supernatural abilities and a fierce protective nature. So if you're in the Ozarks, specifically in Missouri, and you don't want to encounter the Ozark howler, respect the wilderness, don't go out at night, and if you do hear a terrifying sound, just go home. Montana. The Flathead Lake Monster. Loch Ness Monster variant, but with antlers. The coolest thing about this cryptid is a Native American legend surrounding it, which I'm going to tell now. According to legend, long ago, the first native tribe to live in the area lived in an island in the middle of the lake. One winter, while they were crossing the frozen lake to move to another camp, two girls saw antlers approximately 2 feet in length protruding from the frozen ice. Thinking the antlers belonged to some animals, the girls decided to chop them off and take them. While trying to take off these antlers with sharp rocks, the antlers started to shake and the ice split open all around them. The monster's head opened, appearing through the ice, and shook its giant antlers. These girls used special abilities to transform into balls and escape the monster, but half of their tribe drowned in that lake. That's the story. So, moral of the story, don't steal antlers you find in the ice, because if you do, you might live if you have the ability to turn into a ball, but you're gonna kill all your friends, so don't do it. Nebraska. The Alkali Lake Monster. The Alkali Lake Monster is a huge alligator-like horned creature that lives in, you guessed it, the Alkali Lake in Nebraska. It's not a direct Loch Ness Monster ripoff, so that's why I'm giving it a bit more love. This monster is claimed to have rough grayish brown skin and also is 40 feet long, and like I mentioned before, it has a horn in between its eyes on its head. The legend states that this lake monster consumes livestock in large quantities, causes earthquakes, and even disorients travelers that get too close to it. According to my research, I couldn't confirm if it was believed to be supernatural or not, but I'm gonna assume it was because not many creatures cause earthquakes. Unless they're super thick, which is a completely different story. Nevada. Tahoe Tessie. Nevada's Loch Ness Monster. Moving on. New Hampshire. Wood Devils. Wood Devils are believed to be one or a small group of Bigfoot-like creatures in the woodland hills of Coos County, New Hampshire. They've been spotted since the 1930s and described as tall, around 7 to 9 feet, with shaggy tan gray hair and very similar to Bigfoot's, besides the fact that they are slightly skinnier. A strange trait about this cryptid specifically is that they refuse to hide behind trees. If they are already behind a tree, they will hide behind it. But if humans are coming near them and they are not near cover, they will simply stand still and stare at you until you leave. Kind of creepy, kind of cool. That's about it. New Jersey. The Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a legendary cryptid that is said to inhabit the forests of the Pine Barrens in South Jersey. This cryptid is described as a two-legged, goat-like, bat-like creature with hooves. Let me explain. The creature is said to walk on 2 hooved feet, have a goat-like body and a horse-like head with 2 large, leathery, bat-like wings on its back. It's also said to have a forked or pointed tail as well. Oh, and its hands aren't hooves, its hands actually have claws. The legend states that it moves quickly and is often described as emitting a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. This may sound obvious, but the New Jersey Devils, the official NHL team of New Jersey, is actually named after this cryptid, which is pretty cool. Now that I think about it, this might be the first time I've ever mentioned sports in this channel, which is kind of funny. New Mexico. Teratorns. Okay, this one's a bit interesting because this is actually a real creature kind of mixed with cryptid mythology. Teratorns are prehistoric birds that were the ancestors of modern day vultures. Skeletons that have been found measure their wingspans to be over 20 feet long, and they were thought to have weighed over 100 pounds, which for a bird is insane. These birds are presumed to be extinct, but they have found numerous skeletons. Why I mention this on this list is because in New Mexico, the Thunderbird cryptid mythology that we mentioned earlier exists in New Mexico as well, and it is believed that the Thunderbirds were potentially based off of the Teratorns, which existed long before ancient peoples, but they still somehow had knowledge of them and maybe even encountered them. New York. Champ. Champ is the Loch Ness Monster of Lake Champlain in New York. That's about it. North Carolina. Wampus. Wampus, or the Wampus cat, is a cryptid based in Appalachian folklore. It is described as a fearsome hybrid between a mountain lion and a woman, but kind of just displays itself as a mountain lion with 6 legs. Believers claim that the Wampus cat roams the wilderness, emitting eerie sounds to strike terror into the hearts of those who encounter it. It's simple, but kind of cool. I'll give it that. North Dakota. Thunderbirds. I don't know how I accidentally made this the same cryptid for 2 different states, and this is the 3rd mention I've had of this cryptid in this video, so yeah, Thunderbirds, woo, let's keep going. Ohio. Loveland Frogman. The Loveland Frogman is simply described as a humanoid frog creature that stands at about 4 feet tall. Honestly, more of a chill dude than a cryptid, but figured you guys would like him. Say hi, Frogman. Oh yeah. If you've made it this far, say hi Frogman in the comments to say hi to Frogman and also to confuse people that haven't made it this far yet. Oklahoma. The Oklahoma octopus. The Oklahoma octopus is a cryptid that is said to live in man-made freshwater lakes in Oklahoma where it attacks and kills unsuspecting swimmers, and that's it. Oregon. Gumbaroo. The Gumbaroo is described by early lumberjacks as being larger than a bear with tougher, shiny black skin that absolutely nothing could pierce. It is even claimed that bullets just bounce off the thing. And according to the legend, the only way to kill it is with fire. And if you set it on fire, it literally explodes. This cryptid does have a good name, so congrats, Oregon. Nice job, Gumbaroo. Pennsylvania. The Squonk. Shout out to Pennsylvania for having one of the most depressing cryptids there is. The Squonk is more or less of a pig-like creature that only walks around at dusk and dawn. It is covered with extremely loose skin that is littered with warts and moles. The Squonk is famously known for being perpetually unhappy and always crying, like a lot. Skilled hunters can even track down the Squonk by finding its tear-stained trail. And when the Squonk is concerned, frightened, or feels like it may be in danger, it can literally dissolve into a puddle of tears to escape any danger. Doesn't get much sadder than that. Rhode Island. Vampire Mercy Brown. The cryptid for this one technically is just vampires, but this story is kind of interesting and unique to Rhode Island specifically. The Mercy Brown vampire incident occurred in 1892 during what is known now as the New England Vampire Panic. At the time, tuberculosis was running rampant, and for some reason, people thought that this disease outbreak was caused by the influence of the undead. During this time, the people would perform rituals to banish the undead from our plane of existence forever. Why this is called the Mercy Brown vampire incident is because during this time, the Brown family had their daughter, Mercy, die of tuberculosis. Friends and neighbors of the Brown family believed that one of the family members was a vampire, although they didn't call them that at the time. This was in accordance to folklore at the time, which linked multiple deaths in a family to undead activity, aka vampire activity. The story goes a lot deeper, but as you know, this video is long. Rhode Island, vampires, let's keep going. South Carolina. The Gray Man. The Gray Man is a legendary cryptid from South Carolina that is considered a friendly ghost. He appears on beaches and shores, particularly before hurricanes and other strong storms. The legend states that he was on his way to propose to the love of his life when he was killed, and now his spirit wanders South Carolina, warning others of impending danger. The legend states that if you encounter the Gray Man before a storm, you will be protected and your entire house may be saved. This is a pretty interesting and potentially our first upbeat cryptid on the list, so good job, South Carolina. I like this one. South Dakota. Tekuhi. Tekuhi means big man in the Lakota language, who are the indigenous peoples of South Dakota. Tekuhi is said to be a supernatural being who serves as a guardian spirit protecting land from invaders and malevolent creatures that hunt humans and animals. He is a cryptid that protects the nature and humans and animals from other cryptids, and for that reason, he's okay in my book, which is why I discussed this Bigfoot dupe. Tennessee. The Tennessee Wildman. The Tennessee Wildman is basically the opposite of Tekuhi. Like Tekuhi, he is a 7-foot tall, dark-haired, humanoid creature, although that's about where it ends. He has piercing red eyes and screams a disturbing war cry that frightens anything that hears it. He smells awful, kind of like Bigfoot, but he is extremely aggressive. The Tennessee Wildman is extremely strong, fast, and agile, and is extremely territorial as well. He has an obsession with targeting dogs and women, and although he is typically seen trying to attack women, he has never been successful, as these women always find a way to escape. What do you guys think? Evil Bigfoot, cool or not cool? Texas. Donkey Lady. Donkey Lady is the famous cryptid said to haunt the Donkey Lady Bridge in San Antonio, Texas. According to the legend, the bridge is inhabited by the spirit of a woman who is horribly disfigured by a fire, leading to her being referred to as the Donkey Lady. It is said that she haunts the bridge, appearing to unsuspecting travelers who pass by, and the legend also states that she may even chase or attack those who get too close to her bridge. Kind of feel bad for the lady. She got made fun of for something she couldn't control, but at least she's getting revenge. Good for her. Do you, Donkey Lady. Utah. Skinwalkers. No video about cryptids is truly complete until you mention skinwalkers, and this video is no different. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. Skinwalkers typically use these disguises or possessions to stalk their prey and kill and attack people. They also have other supernatural abilities such as super strength and voice mimicry to lead people to their certain death. The skinwalker lore is deep and goes far beyond the scope of this video, but I have made a video discussing them in the past. They're very cool, and check them out after this video if you want. Vermont. The Northfield Pigman. The Northfield Pigman is a cryptid or urban legend from Northfield, Vermont. Descriptions of the pigman vary, but he is typically described as a humanoid creature with the body of a large pig, but with the features of a man. Sightings of the pigman have been reported across rural areas surrounding Northfield and often in the vicinity of old farmhouses or abandoned buildings. Some interpretations believe that pigman is the result of an experimentation gone wrong or a spirit of a deceased farmer seeking revenge, although the origins are still unknown and often debated. Pigman is definitely creepy and sometimes is even described as just a boy that went missing in the woods who decided to wear a pig's face as a mask. But yeah, lots of lore, kind of creepy. Good job, Vermont. Virginia. Snallygaster. Like almost every cryptid, descriptions of the snallygaster vary, but it is often depicted as a fearsome dragon-like creature with large wings, sharp claws, and a metallic beak lined with razor-sharp teeth. According to the folklore, it preys on livestock and unsuspecting travelers, specifically children, by swooping down from the skies and snatching its victims. Some variants of the snallygaster say it has tentacles instead of razor-sharp teeth, but either way, it's a terrifying-looking creature. Washington. The Conser Lake Monster. The Loch Ness Monster, but in Washington. West Virginia. Mothman. The legend of the cryptid known as Mothman originates from the 1960s in Point Pleasant in West Virginia. Mothman is described as a winged humanoid creature with glowing red eyes and is believed to be a sign of impending disasters. The Mothman legend has taken Point Pleasant by storm, and there is so much tourist attractions based around it, and I have covered Mothman in another video of mine, so I won't go too deep into details. But there are many stories where he is seen jumping at cars from the side of the road and jumping on the top of cars that are parked in rural locations at night. It is a creepy cryptid that showed up and almost as fast as it appeared, disappeared from the zeitgeist. It is now simply a figment of our imagination. Wisconsin. The Beast of Bray Road. The Beast of Bray Road is described as a 7-foot-tall humanoid-style creature covered in hair or fur with the head of a large wolf that also has glowing red or orange eyes. It's been seen running on 2 and 4 legs, and some reports describe it as being close to a werewolf, and others say it's more close to a Bigfoot-style cryptid. Not really a ton going on here, but what can you expect? It's Wisconsin. Just kidding, Wisconsin. I love ya. Wyoming. Jackalope. Admittedly, this is likely my favorite cryptid on the entire list, simply because I find it cute, and honestly, I hope it exists. Or at least did at one point. The jackalope is a cryptid that is described as being a rabbit with antelope horns, and that's basically it. They're pretty iconic in the Wyoming area, urban legend scene, and even pop culture as well. I know this video is alphabetical, but we kind of saved the best for last, unintentionally. And with that, bros, I have to say thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you know that I do take your feedback into consideration, and I know you guys have been asking for longer videos, and I know you guys have been asking for dark mode videos, so I thought with this video, I would give you both of those. Also, it's been a while since I talked about mythical creatures, cryptids, folklore, urban legends, all of it. So I thought, why not bring it back with this banger video? If you guys like the from every state concept, I would love to do it with more interesting topics. But with that, I'm going to end this video here. I'm tired and I need to get a CP weepy. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, trust me, bro.